My guest today is a United States Army combat veteran who served in Operation Iraqi Freedom, suffered brain injuries and PTSD from combat, built a nonprofit to help other veterans, was named Kentucky Veteran of the Year, and was lauded by Senator Rand Paul and congratulated by President Trump. Then, the Biden Department of Justice convicted him of theft of government funds for volunteering. He was sentenced to federal prison for helping veterans. His name is Jeremy Harrell, and this is his story.
So I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. I lived kind of in the not so good part of Louisville. It wasn't by choice. You know, we didn't have a lot of stuff growing up. Pretty kind of rough childhood, honestly. A lot of domestic violence and a lot of instability and poverty and neglect, things like that. But I actually grew up. It wasn't maybe half a mile from the famous Churchill Downs, right, the racetrack where the Kentucky Derby is, and I just remember I just thought I was cool because I lived next to Churchill Downs, and I was like, I'll never get in there, but it's pretty cool to live next to it. And so, yeah, man, I grew up there and played sports, and that's pretty much it. Just try to survive at a very young age. Just try to figure out. My mom is bipolar, very manic at times, so it's kind of a I love you, hate you kind of situation. Hard to manage, especially when you're a child. And my dad he was kind of in or out, just enough to try to buy love for a minute, right? And then all of a sudden he's like, well, son, I got to go again, right? And so he was there was no consistency there. I was practically raised by my grandfather and my grandmother, and unfortunately, my grandfather passed away when I was in Iraq, and that destroyed me. He was like my hero. The guy he was old country boy, had like a 7th grade education, but one of the smartest men I've ever had the privilege of knowing. And to this day, he's my hero. I've met some cool people, right? But he's definitely my hero. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to come home to go to his funeral. Unfortunately, they said, we're fighting a war here. They could have had a little bit better delivery than that, right? But the truth is the truth. And so, so I think about him all the time, man, especially when tough things happen. He always had the best advice. Usually not repeatable, but best advice. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it went.
Where was your dad in all of this?
So my dad, he would bounce around, man. He'd live in South Carolina for a little bit. He'd go to Florida. He lived in Maryland for a little bit, and Arizona. And what's so crazy about him is the guy could have been a multimillionaire. Like, he could have done anything. I mean, he just knew how to do everything. And but he didn't like authority. And he had the same kind of, to his credit, and he's passed away now, but to his credit, he had the same kind of upbringing I did. So I don't hold any resentment towards him, right? Because you only know what you know. And that was actually one of the last things he said before he passed away in the hospital bed was, "You broke the cycle," right? And he's like, "I didn't know how to be the dad that you needed." And so that was, unfortunately, it was at the very end of his life, but it was still cool to get that out there. But he would just bounce around and he would work and make good money. And then when he had like some money, he would quit working until he didn't have money, right? He's kind of one of those guys, almost like a gypsy in a sense, man, really. And he tried to pull us with him, a few times. I've lived in a bunch of different places. And then eventually, my mom's like, can't do it. And of course, he would take my mom to these other states. We lived in South Carolina and Maryland, and they wouldn't get along. And there'd be some abuse there, some domestic violence, and she's trapped all by herself. Then my grandma has to come in and rescue her and things. So we just stayed in Louisville, and I just seen him when I could, And then when I got a little older and in my teenage years, he wanted to be more active, and I think it's because it's easier, right? There's no I can take care of myself at that point, but I would go and visit him, and it just really felt more like a friend than like a dad, And then of course when I started, when I went into the military and got out of the military and started, helping veterans with my nonprofit, we blew up really quick, and I just remember him taking a lot of credit for that, right? And so I think the only real issue we had where I didn't have like the control to just let it go was when when he was telling his buddies, he's just like his dad, right? Or he would say, I'm proud of how I raised him. And I'm like, So there was a time where we were at how we hung out, he wanted to get a drink at the bar, right? So I'd go to these little dive bars, and we're sitting there, and he's telling his buddies, he's bragging about all the things that I've done and stuff, and then he, and then I said, Dad, you really can't take credit for that, man. I just gotta be honest with you. I said, "One thing you did do, though, is you taught me what not to do." I thought that was fair. He didn't like that at all, right? It kinda embarrassed him a little bit in front of, but I just had to put that out there, right? Like, "Hey, it's all good. I'm not mad at you. But just you can't pretend like you made me who I am. I had to do that myself." And when you have to do it yourself and you go through that process, of course, the Army helped, some good leaders in the Army helped, kind of make me a man, so to speak. It's hard to sit there and listen to somebody who had the opportunity, who could have actually done it and done it well had he been focused on that. So, but outside of that, man, I think we settled that. Unfortunately, on his deathbed, it was right around COVID. It was in 2020 September, and I mean, he was just 60 years old. He had liver cancer and cirrhosis from drugs and alcohol, and yeah, so that was our last conversation. The only time I ever seen him shed a tear was, you broke the cycle. You're not like me, and I'm proud of you. I think it might have been other than when he's telling his buddies what he's telling. I don't know that he's ever like looked me in the eye and said that, or there wasn't a whole lot of I love yous from him. So I think it's just sad that at the end of people's lives, they realize what's important. But at that point, there's no going back. But I like to think that we made amends, and I told him, "I forgive you." I said those words, like, "I forgive you. I don't want you to go on to the next life with any kind of unforgiveness." Like, there's been a lot of positive things that come out of this. You made me resilient. You've given me drive and motivation. And even if it was not the way that you intended to do it, you did it. And so, anyway, it was a good ending to a sad story, really.
Did your mom ever have a stable job?
No, she was always on disability. I won't say always, but I think when I was really young, she worked at a daycare, and then she got on disability because she was having so many problems. So no, she didn't really. Which obviously there's not a lot you can't really live off disability, and so that made everything challenging. So we would live with my grandparents off and on, or usually in a not so good place, right? But she did the best she could. She tried. I'm coming to this place in my life where I try to forgive everybody, not hold resentment. People do what they know to do at the time, and in fact, she still struggles frequently. I know because I get weird calls, from her, and of course I still talk to her, and she still has a relationship with my kids and things. But I have to keep her at a distance, which is unfortunate. But I got to do what I got to do to protect my own mental health. But yeah, I feel like she at least done what she had to do. And
What were
so,
you passionate about as a kid? Well, aside from sports, what were you
yeah,
thinking, like career-wise and what drove you?
man, I was kind of a strange kid, man. I really wanted to be a paranormal psychologist. Like at a very young age, I would read these books. I really was interested in like paranormal, and just how what happens after and that kind of thing. And I realized that wasn't a real job. And then I started wanting to do something. I just wanted to do something service related. Um, and I really had a lot of intention on being an advocate for the underdog. I hated bullies, right? Like I mean, I was bullied. Most people are at some point in their life, and I just was never that way. And something interesting, despite like the troubled childhood, it never made me a mean kid. Like it never made me angry at the world. It did the opposite, right? It made me want to help people. So that's why I wanted to join the military. One of the two reasons. One was that, right, to do something bigger than myself, but also to give back. But then also, it was kind of my way out of the situation I was in because I didn't have money and my grades. I feel like I'm a smart kid, or I was a smart kid, but I couldn't focus in school because of all the external stuff, and so I didn't have good grades for college. And so that's when I joined the military. But I remember waiting to go to boot camp. There was this big snowstorm. Just to kind of give you an idea. For the people listening, I would go to these senior living homes and I would take grocery store orders, and I would go to the store and fulfill these grocery store orders for these folks who couldn't get out. And the reason why that stays in my head is because it really just explains everything I've done after, right? So I think you could go one or two ways in that position. I could have been mad, angry. I could have been in a gang. I could have done all that stuff. But for whatever reason, I feel like God was looking out for me and not letting that change my heart and who I was. And so that's why service become number one. I just love helping people, man. Like I say it sometimes when I do TV interviews. I say, people love to go to the beach, some love to go to the mountains. I like to help people. Like it's fun for me. So that's just kind of, and but I do think a lot of that attributes to seeing suffering, for obviously me suffering, but watching my family suffer, watching my mom suffer, not being able to do anything about that. I'm like, how can I put myself in a position to be able to do something about this? And so that's what I did.
Why do you think some people journey down that path of, gangs or addiction, or just crime in general, coming from the same environment as you, and some don't? Some take the path you did.
Yeah, I think as far as like gangs, it's generally, I don't say it's just guys, but boys who don't have anybody paying attention to them, who don't feel that don't have that community, don't have that love at home. They're just looking for someone to care about them, and it gets so bad to the point where it doesn't matter what you have to do to earn it. You just want it so bad. It's very sadistic, really. It's really utilizing someone's most vulnerable moment to get them to do your bidding, you know? And that's why I didn't wanna do it. Now, I hung out with guys who wanted to do it, but I didn't do it. It's not because I'm better, it's just because I just had my mind set on other things, and as far as addiction goes, I think that's clearly like, self-medication. It's trying to escape from reality. Um, and it's easier to do that than to fix your reality because obviously sometimes we can't fix it. When you think about the criminal justice system, that's one of them. Once they have you, they have you. And out of everything that I've been through, that part of my life has made me the most vulnerable only because there's nothing I can do for myself really to fix it. It's not like common sense approaches work. It's not practical. You shouldn't necessarily Google how to do law, right? And so it really puts you in a position of, man, I just really got to hang here. And I think that translates back to the kids in my neighborhood who, they felt like, well, at least this guy over here is showing me love. At least he's giving me $20 here and there, right, to go to the store and get something I want. And all I have to do is go check these cars and make sure they're unlocked and get the things out of the glove compartment, whatever it is they're doing. But just, I mean, I was tempted to do that. Don't get me wrong. Like to have $20 when I was a kid was, it might as well have been 500, but I just knew that, that had that not worked out and that I got caught doing it would be worse. It would mean more than that $20 ever would. Right. And so yeah, man. So I think that's what happens. I think these guys are looking for somebody to love them. And then if that doesn't work, I think the next thing is how do I get to where I don't care about love? How do I get to where I don't care about what my dad did, or I don't care about what my mom did, or in the form of sexual abuse and things, how I not care that my uncle did this or my aunt did that? Well, you just feed yourself these drugs, and, the problem is you come out of it and you got to do it again because reality is still going to hit you in the face, right? So it's a never-ending cycle.
What year was it when you joined the military?
I joined in 1999.
So what was the state of the world at that point?
Bill Clinton was president. There wasn't a whole lot going on, which really changed when George Bush became president. But I went in to the recruiting station with a buddy, and I'm only meant to get a pamphlet, and they're pretty good at that, man. They get trained to do that. And I'm sitting down there with him. He's going to go do some cool stuff, and I'm like, well, really, I don't really have a plan. Like right now I'm working at this factory. Nothing wrong with that, but I was like, I'd like to go see what it looks like outside. Because here's the deal: like being a poor kid in Louisville, I lived in South Louisville. Now to go, like, what was interesting about that is to go on the other side of town was a trip. Like we were so like embedded into a certain part of town. Like there were parts of Louisville that I've never seen until I become an adult. And Louisville's not huge, It's the 16th largest city in the country. It's not real big. But yet I hadn't been on the other side of town because we didn't have the resources to do that, and there was nothing over there for us. And so when I'm sitting there listening to him going to do this and going to do that, I thought, maybe I'll think about doing something like that, you know? And then before I ever left, him and I both were joined on this buddy system. And so I just remember going home and telling my mom, like, hey, in a couple months, I'm leaving. I'm going to boot camp. And she freaked out, man. She's like, what do you mean? Like, you didn't even talk to me about this. And I said, well, there's nothing to talk about. Like, I made a decision, and I'm going to get out of here. And hopefully I can make a better life for myself, and maybe I can help you later. And so that's what happened. That's kind of how it went, man. There was no like deep thought. I didn't ask a bunch of people. My dad actually had been in the military, but he AWOL'd. Yeah. So he couldn't tell me much about it either, other than, you know, they look for you when you don't show up, you know? So yeah, so I was ready to go, man. I was looking forward to it. I was training for it, you know, running, because I'm not a big runner. I don't like to run. I always say I'm built to fight, not run. So I was getting prepared for it. Something to look forward to, something positive, you know, like that's pretty cool. That's honorable, right? I wanted my name attached to something honorable for once.
Does his track record get passed down to you at all? Like, does anyone, when they run it in the system or anything?
No, no, my dad was, I mean, my dad died with an active warrant that he'd had for this guy like 5 years. He had this active warrant and never got busted. I mean, he always made sure like his turn signals were working. It might not even have been a great vehicle, but everything was working, right? And he drove speed limit. I mean, he's the best I've ever seen, you know? And so, but no, I've never been, you know, I don't know. I think that's good. I've never been confused with him. You know, if anything, people have always been, man, I'm surprised what you've done, what you've accomplished coming from the place where you come from.
Tell us about boot camp.
Yeah, boot camp was interesting, man. I loved it for the most part. You know, once the initial shock wore off, because here's the deal: there's 3 meals a day here, and a comfortable place to sleep, and nobody's going to be killing or trying to hurt and kill anybody in that you know aspect. And so all I have to do is follow these rules, and yeah, they're yelling and screaming, but whatever. I lived through that. You know what I mean? That's been my whole life. So for me, it was nice to know that, hey, I'm at least for 10 weeks, I'm gonna have 3 meals a day. I'm gonna have clothes. I'm gonna have clean place to take a shower and sleep. But then as we started doing, you know, the military tactics and things, I was like, man, I love this. So I loved it. Now there were other guys who come from different parts, different backgrounds, who were ready to go home, who was like, what the hell did I just do? And generally they were folks who had a lot better than I did, and others, you know, who just had never really faced any kind of significant stress. But the stress for me was, I was like, "Okay, call me what you want. I've been called everything." You know what I mean? And so I did really well at it, and was a platoon guide in boot camp, which is you kind of lead the platoon, and yeah, I enjoyed it.
What happens when you graduate boot camp?
So when you graduate boot camp, you know, it's all this kind of pomp and circumstance, right? You get your dress greens out, and and you get ready for your family to come visit, and then you walk across the parade field. But before that, there's one last like field exercise you have to do, and it's a long march back to where they kind of do a ceremony. This is a couple days before graduation, and I want to say it's a 12-mile march. Now we've already been out in the field for several days. I didn't care too much for that, to be honest. And so we're walking, and you're getting all these blisters on your feet, right? And so I remember, I'll never forget this. I had a drill sergeant who was walking beside me, and he was messing with me the whole time, man. It's like they have this radar, you know, and he's like, "You're slowing down. Why are you slowing down?" And I'm like, "I have blisters." He says, "So what? So what? You keep walking, right?" And we got to this point, and then I was like, "I don't know that I can walk anymore. Not because I don't want to, but I just don't know. I'm worried about what's going on in my boot, right?" The problem is they tell you what size boots you wear. So it was a size and a half smaller than what I've grown up wearing. I don't know why that happens, but they did. So I had like a 9.5. I wear 11.5, right? So no wonder. But I'm going through. I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna get through this. and he says, "You keep going. One more hill. Just one more hill, one hill after the other." And sure enough, we got over this big hill, and you could look down where they're doing this ceremony. And so I made it, right? We get there, and they take this old piece of steel, and then they're talking about who we used to be. Then they kind of throw it out, and then they come with this really nice sword, right? And they're like, "This is who you are now." So it was pretty emotional, and because everybody's in pain at that point, but at the same time, you're like, "Man, I've come a long way in 10 weeks." And then that's when you come back, and about a week later you graduate, and your family comes. You have a family day. So my grandpa was there. He did push-ups with me. I thought that was cool. And then the next day you do the parade, and you do the salute, and really, I was ready to get on to the next thing, but it was cool what they did for us. I do remember this. So in the Marine Corps, you get something a lot cooler than you do in the Army. In the Marine Corps, you get an Eagle Globe and Anchor, and they give it to you. It's nice. It's metal. We get this Army value tag. It's plastic, but I've never seen so many men cry over receiving this piece of plastic. I still talk about that today. I'm like, man, you would have thought that you gave me a new life. And essentially, maybe they did for a lot of us, but you get this green tag, they shake your hand, and they finally say, "Good job." And one good job, man. And it just goes to show how important it is for positive reaffirmation for the people that we care about or the people we're around. That one good job, and everybody's, you got all these tough dudes who are now, just bawling. And yeah, and so then you get done, you do that, and then you go on to your next training phase, usually the day after. And you can either go by bus, or your family usually can drive you there and drop you off. And I chose for my family to take me, I think, because you get a little bit extra time to get there. And I had a girlfriend then, so I wanted to spend a little time with her. And yeah, and then we got up there, and I'll never forget, we got up to Virginia, and my mom decides, and it was a terrible idea, I knew better, that she was going to walk with me up to reception. Um, and I said, "Mom, I really don't need that. Like, I'm just going to, I can carry my stuff. I'm just going to go." She's like, "No," she insisted on going. So sure enough, I know why, right? So she gets up there, and this drill sergeant comes out, and it's just still training phase, right? So they're, "What are you doing? Why are you here? What is your name?" That kind of stuff. I'm going through all that. My mom is like, "Why are you," she's starting to get mad at him, right? "Why are you talking to him?" And I was like, this is going to be the worst start to the next, several weeks. And so finally, I kept telling her, "Mom, this is how it goes." So he's like, "You need to leave him." Right. So she leaves. I walk her back out to the vehicle, and I said, "You know that you just caused me a lot of problems here." Right. And she's like, she's like, "I didn't mean to." She gets in the car. I go back, and he's like, "So I got a mama's boy." And I'm like, man, here we go. Anyway, throughout the training cycle, was able to pull out of that. But if anybody out there is listening that's getting ready to go to boot camp, or to advanced individual training, don't let your mom walk with you up there as much as she wants to, because it's going to cause you problems. But yeah, so we started, AIT, advanced individual training, and then from there you go into your unit.
How are you feeling coming out of boot camp? Were you still passionate about it? Did you feel good?
I was, man. I felt healthy. I felt, I lost like 40 pounds. Um, I felt like I had this mission purpose. I felt like I was going to finally get an opportunity to stand up for people, and not just people, but the whole United States. Like, that was really cool coming from a place where I didn't know that I'd ever see anything outside of the neighborhood. So that was just a real turning point in my life, and so but I was ready to get through the training process too, because I learned very quickly that this is a mind game. It's a mental thing, right? And I know what they're trying to do, but I know what they're doing now, and it's just kind of annoying, right? You don't have to yell at me to get the things that you need, right? I'm a smart guy. But anyway, so no, I was ready to go. I was loving it. I felt like I found my calling. I felt like this is what all the hard stuff that I've been through, it's what it was doing. It was preparing me for this hard stuff. And it did. I mean, and that's the thing about trauma, and that's the thing about stress, and that's the thing about, coming from a tough environment, is that it does a lot of negative things, but it also, it's how you spin it, and what your perspective is, also makes things positive, right? Because I would have been different had I not had that situation. If I'd come from what I would consider like a normal environment, I may not have made it. I may have missed my calling. I may have been like, well, I don't have to sit here and listen to this because I got people who can pay for me to go to school, right? Or can help me get started in life. And so, but I didn't have that to fall back on. So this was great.
Did you ever expect to go to war? Because there wasn't an active war at that point, right?
There wasn't. There's nothing that I can remember. I mean, I think there was some peacekeeping stuff going over in Bosnia, and then 9/11 happened, and then everything changed for everybody, and then it was just not a matter of if, but a matter of when, but even going there, of course, you have apprehension because obviously nobody wants to die, generally, but it's almost like the Super Bowl, right? Because like you train and you train and you train, and sometimes people go their whole military career and never get to really put their training to use in an environment like that. And then I felt like I was going to get to do that. I felt like it was a little early. I was like when I went to Iraq, I turned 21 and 22 there. Um, but I was ready to go. Now, don't get me wrong. When I got there, I realized that it's way different to train when you're shooting at targets that aren't real, and that real bullets are coming. Mortar rounds are coming. So that changes the game a little bit. But at the same time, it's weird. It's like this fear, but excitement at the same time. And what I had to do, Ian, is I had to think to myself, like, I may not survive and be okay with that. And once I did that, like once I just assumed that I wasn't coming home, it was like a weight was lifted and I was better at my job. But up until that point, you're always, because I had a brand new daughter right at that time. And that changes everything, right? If I hadn't had the daughter, whatever. But now I have this other human who depends on me, right? And I just got her, and she couldn't even talk yet when I left. And so I'm going, man, it's not about me now. It's about her. And so, but then so it's like you have that on one hand. On the other hand, that's a very real possibility that your life will end there. And I couldn't just worry about all these things. So I had to quit worrying about that and just accept death. And then if it happened, okay. But once I got it out of my mind and was able to focus on what I was doing, it actually made me safer. So it's weird. I'm kind of glad I had that, epiphany. I mean, most people at 21 shouldn't have to do that, but it was so helpful. And it just goes to show that once we overcome the fear, because the fear is what holds us hostage, right? Fear is a liar. Once we overcome fear, then all of a sudden, then we can really focus on what we're there to do. And so that's kind of how we started it.
What was your role in Iraq?
So I worked at enemy prisoner of war camps. I worked at one of the largest detention centers in Iraq, really where they say that ISIS was born. I'm sure you're familiar with ISIS, called Camp Bucca. And then we had a detachment in the infamous Abu Ghraib prison, where unfortunately some people made some videos of torturing prisoners. And I always have to say that wasn't me. I was actually on a podcast one time with a guy who was former CIA, and I always preface when I tell him where I was, I'll tell him it wasn't. And he goes, "I know it wasn't because I investigated all those people." And I'm like, "Say it again for the crowd," But yeah, so we would bounce back and forth from those places.
And what type of people were they holding there at that point?
So
early on in the war,
and so it's really weird because obviously it was for terrorist insurgents, but it could be someone who broke curfew, right? It could be the camel herder who was out too late, and this is kind of what I have to say believe but this is what I firmly believe started ISIS is that you have some of like you had al-Baghdadi, right? Who was one of the most notorious terrorists ever. He gets put there. Well, then you have some of these camel herders. You have some guys that work at a store. You have farmers who just got picked up. There's no NCIS. Nobody knows how long they've been there. It's chaotic. This is the beginning of the war. It was chaos. Well, they're staying there like 4, 5, 6 months. They're pissed. We don't know who they really are. We can't just "Oh, well, you're a farmer. Cool. We'll let you go." Well, he notices that, and some of these other terrorists notice that. So they go, "You see what these Americans are doing? You see what they're doing to you? You can't even support your," they formed this militia, really terrorist group called ISIS, and that's how he recruited. He recruited based off our inability to know everything about everybody. and to be consistent in that way at that part of the war. And so, yeah, so you have farmers who eventually turn into people who like to kill us, right? Or you have al Baghdadi, or you have other insurgents.
How are the conditions in there?
It's bad, man. When the Air Force come in several years later, they made it look like as normal as a prison you can be in the middle of Iraq, but it was basically just tents and concertina wire, like 5 strands of concertina wire, and some of these guys would try to jump over that. And that was just a terrible thing, man. That you can't jump over 5 strands. But the thing about these prisoners is the lack of fear, man. Like I remember, I was a young guy there, so I'm going, why would I like? How could somebody rationally think they could try to jump over razor wire, like 5 strands high, 5 strands wide? But it was so worth it for them to get out of there. And I just couldn't put that together, man, because I'm like, you got to know you can't do that. Michael Jordan couldn't do that, right? And so what they would do, they would try to jump, they'd land in this wire and cut themselves up. And then, of course, our medics had to go take care of them, which is unfair to them, right? But the conditions were poor. I mean, it was nasty, you know. They they were all just kind of sleeping on top of each other. And then, of course, up at Abu Ghraib, it was a prison in Baghdad before. That's where the torture chambers was, what that Saddam used to do his bidding. So it was like a prison, like an old prison, like a brushy mountain type thing. But yeah, so very poor conditions. Just basically tents and concertina wire and different compounds. And then you had people that Geneva Convention and things working there. And then I remember they would try to get these prisoners home whenever they figured out that they shouldn't be there. Um, I don't know, it's kind of similar today, but over here. But anyway, try to give them a little money and put them on a bus and send them on their way, And I just always thought that was all these things at 21. I'm going, man, they're giving them a ride now, Like, of course, we couldn't always do that, but and then occasionally I'd get on these buses and we'd escort these prisoners to Abu Ghraib from Camp Bucca, which was about an 8-hour drive. And these buses were similar to kind of like a Greyhound bus maybe, uh, but there was no real divider in there. There was like some 2x4s, and it's really, I mean, we didn't have anything. So 2x4s, like some razor wire. And then, of course, there's the aisleway. There's nothing really keeping them in there other than a 12 gauge, which was the universal language, because they all didn't speak English, but many of them did, especially the Al Qaeda guys, a lot of them. And I remember sitting there, and we would sit in the first couple seats, and that's a long ride with these guys. And they do silly stuff. They'd stand up and Saddam's a good man, and sit down, calm down, right? Or they'd try to piss in bottles and throw that at you. Or they would try to agitate you through noise and things like that. So, but I had a conversation with one of the guys who spoke fairly good English, and what I thought was interesting about that conversation is he asked me about family, and at the end of the day, you're not really supposed to get into that, right? But I'm like, I'm here, he's here, right? So I had to I have a daughter, He said, I have a daughter, and I have other kids, and just through that conversation, I realized that we all kind of want the same things, man. Like here he is on this bus in this war, and I'm not saying he's a good guy. He probably would cut my neck off if he had the chance to do that. But I just know I just learned that, man, we really want the same things for our kids. We want safety, we want prosperity, we want freedom. The only thing that's usually different about us is our culture, our religion, and those things keep, I think, us from being able to have more peace in the world. Like, what if we had those kind of conversations instead of the other ones? And so you got to imagine, I'm 21, right, and I'm having all these thoughts in my head, and so that kind of changed my opinion a little bit of what we were doing. It went from this, they should all die, right? Because that's what they train you, right? To, wait a minute, I don't know that they all should. Like this guy, he only had to fight because they were going to kill his family. And so they made him fight. Does that make him bad? What would I do? I'd fight. You said you're gonna kill my kids, I'd do anything, right? So how can I hate this guy? So I had a hard time hating just for the sake of hating. And, so I learned in that moment not to always judge a book by a cover, not to always judge based on culture, based on religion. Um, and I think that changed the game for me, and it especially come in handy when I was in prison because there's so many different backgrounds there, right? And I was able to fall in really easy because I had this affinity for respect for everybody's differences. And that's what they loved about me there. But just imagine, 21 years old, I'm working in a prison in Iraq, not knowing that some of the lessons that I would learn there would translate when I'm in prison. Never thought I would ever be in prison, but was in prison, years later, for helping people who had been over there with me. You see what I mean? It was kind of a weird culmination of events.
What do you think impacted you the most during your time in Iraq?
Uh, I think it was the connection and camaraderie of the people that you're serving with. See, a lot of people, they think we go and we serve because we believe that everything we're doing in America's right. Um, I can tell you this, like the initial thought was, yeah, that's what I'm doing. But then it become I'm serving because of my buddy over here and because of his family and this buddy and because of their family. It was the folks to our right and left. And I realized again at a very young age what a true um, brotherly bond is. And it goes way deeper than hanging out on the weekend, right? And that's basically what I envision what friendship is. You hang out on weekends, you drink, and you party a little bit, and then that's friends. But over there, like what I've learned is that when you suffer in the same vicinity as other people, you develop a bond so intense it can never be broken. And in fact, I had lunch not too long ago with three guys that I was in Iraq with, and it was literally like we never left each other, you know. And I don't have many friends in the civilian side that I feel like that's what happens. And as much as I try to create that, it just isn't the same. I think there has to be a level of suffering to create those undying bonds. And I think that's one thing I learned as well. So suffering is bad. Nobody likes it. But if you have to do it, it's better to have someone to do it with, right? And so that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned while I was there.
How long were you in Iraq for?
16 months. 16 months. And then we got extended a few times. It was supposed to be 6 months. That's when deployment time started changing. After World War II and Vietnam and things, there were deployments were generally 6 months long. And then the first Gulf War was actually, they called it the 44-hour war, but of course people were over there for up to maybe 6 and 9 months, at least the people I know. So to be over there past a year was unique. But it just so happened that we had so much to do there that we kept getting extended. And it actually broke me for a lot of reasons because again I had my daughter. So when I went there, I thought, okay, by June I'll be home. No problem. June come, no, we're not going home. Maybe August. Cool. August comes, no, we have to stay longer. By Christmas, you'll be home. Oh, cool. Perfect. That'll work out just perfect. December, maybe December 22nd. No, we're going to be here till March, or actually April. We're going to be here till April. I'm like, wait a minute. So we go from December to April, another 4 months. Now, keep in mind, like, the longer you're there, the more probability that you might not make it, right? So it was just that every time you thought you were leaving, you're preparing your family, you're making that call, right? And then, no, I'm sorry. And so they're very anxious and they're asking you things. They don't know what's going on. So they're asking you things that they can't understand, right? Well, if they give you a date, like they have, like it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. They do what they want. Like I work for them. Like, I don't ever have to go home if they don't want me to, right? And so yeah, so it was 16 months long, man. It was a long time, and I was really happy to get back. But the problem with that is what happens when you get back, and how different you are that you don't really even notice, about yourself. And the people around you there don't notice because a lot of them are like you, right? Again, we're all suffering the same things, and I remember coming home, and I was used to and I think I heard another guy who was in Afghanistan. It was on your show as a DC police officer. I think he said it really well when he talked about having that kind of friendship there, and then coming back home, and the expectations to still have that with other people, and it just you just don't have it. And then when you realize you don't have that, you're like, oh man. So you feel like you're in a room where nobody understands you all the time. You know, why do you got to sit with your back next to the door? Simple question, but if I have to explain this 15 times, like, well, this is why. Or why do you not like crowds? Like, this is a concert, right? Those sort of things. And you always have to answer that, right? And it's you're not embarrassed, like I've never been embarrassed of what happened to me there. It's just it's just when you're trying to overcome it, and you keep being reminded of, like, take this for example, like if you're a recovering addict and you've been, say, sober for, I don't know, 5 years, and then you meet up with some people who, yeah, you used to like that meth, right? Like, you was a meth guy. Well, no, I'm sober. I'm not on any drugs, right? It's essentially just like that. Like, you're reminding me of something I don't really want to be reminded of. And then you have to get people up to speed, right, on why things are different, in hopes that they can work with you to help your transition be as easy as possible. But it's very difficult because you can't hardly explain war other than it's bad. Everybody knows that. It's dangerous. Everybody knows that. You could die. Everybody knows that. But it ain't always the bullets flying. Like, it's the environmental part of that. Being out in this desert, these sandstorms, the smells, it's nasty, it's a dirty place. You're getting sick all the time. Um, and all those things over the course of many months, it's torturous in its own right. But everybody likes to talk about the explosions and stuff. But there's sometimes that don't happen for several weeks. But it's the mundane. You know what I think the hardest part for me was the boredom in between. It's very, and again, prison reminded me of this, right? I'm in the middle of this desert. I can't really go anywhere. I have access to nothing. And when things happen, yeah, it's exciting. You go do your thing. But when it isn't, which is generally good, you're just out there with a bunch of time. You're out there with a bunch of time, and then you're out there with your mind. And man, you put those two things together, and that's brutal oftentimes, especially in an environment like war or prison. Yeah.
How do you cope with that when you get home?
Well, I always took pride in saying, I never, developed a habit for drugs and alcohol. I mean, I did drink, but I wanted to. But I didn't necessarily get drunk. But women, I think, for me, some people just think addiction can be, drugs and things like that. But there's a lot of different addictions. And so I thought, I'll be honest, I thought, well, for me, I like women, so that's not bad. Like, drugs are bad. Trying to have women fill a void for you, that's not bad. That's good. Well, the problem with that is you get in these toxic relationships, right? And so that's why my wife Erin, is my fourth wife, right? And when I was 38, I think, 38 when we got married. So I had three wives by the time I was 38. And all the first three marriages together didn't equate to 5 years. But what would happen is it was that ideal, right? Oh, I found this woman. She makes me feel good, right? She cares about me. We're going to get married. It's going to be happy. All this stuff I'm going to forget about because I'm going to have new priorities. Well, that sounds good in theory, but it's like being addicted to drugs and going to a trap house, right? It's very dangerous. So then when you realize you get into this relationship where you get married, and then it isn't what you thought it was going to be, because reality is it's not always a honeymoon, right? You got the real life stressors of bills and things, finances, all kinds of things. And I got all this residual stuff. I have severe and chronic PTSD. I have traumatic brain injury. I have all these physical things at a very young age. Don't understand why I'm broken like this. Like, I'm supposed to be healthy and young, and then going from super healthy to now you got all these things you had to deal with that does something to you mentally. And then all of a sudden your wife is mad at you because you didn't help her get the groceries out of the car, or mad because you didn't cut the grass at the day that she thought you should cut it. Well, normally that ain't that big of a deal. That's normal. Well, but when you're carrying all this anxiety and you're carrying all this doubt and uncertainty from what's going on inside of you, that's just one more thing. It's like that's just one more thing I'm not good at. I can't play in the game anymore because I'm broken, right? Now I'm not even good enough to go get the groceries when I'm supposed to. I'm not even good enough to cut the grass when I'm supposed to, right? When you're in the military, you're this golden boy, like you're the man, right? Then all of a sudden you're not. So that creates marital conflict. It's not all like the veteran who's dealing with that, but it's just how do I explain to her why I can't do certain things? And then even if I explain it, well, how's it her fault, right? And so when it comes to kids, that's how that was always bothersome to me with my kids is like for me, and I know some other veterans will agree with this, Disney World is the worst place you can send me, right? Like it's just chaotic and nuts, and I've been there before. And well, but what if my kids want to go to Disney World? They didn't fight no war. I did it all for them. I don't want them to fight no war, but I just don't really like that. Like I'm not going to enjoy it. So what do we usually do? We go, but then scanning. We're not relaxed. We're on edge. Every time they ask for something, when they're going to ask for things, it's Disney. Like, stop asking me, right? So then it becomes an enjoyable experience for them, and then now you feel guilty, right? Because you took that experience from them, and then you go, well, did we just waste this opportunity? And so it's just this ever going scenario that you have to try to navigate. And so I was always trying to, I guess, find normal and didn't respect that that I wasn't ever going to be quote unquote normal, whatever that is, right? Nobody really knows what normal is, but like everyone else that was, 23 years old who were just basically having the time of their life doing the things they want to do. And I feel like, oh, I can't go to that concert, man. Or they'd ask me to, I don't really want to go to that festival or whatever it is because I didn't want to be around a bunch of people, Or if you do go out, right, you're just watching doors. Like if something happened, what's the easiest way out of here? Or you're looking at, especially bars, you're looking at people and you're going, who's the most aggressive guy in here? That's who I need to be watching. Who's acting belligerent? What are they doing with their hands? Why's their hand in their pocket? It's just, and I'll never forget, man, I got kicked out. And thankfully I haven't been back since. I got kicked out of a place in Louisville. It's kind of like a central hub of clubs called 4th Street Live. And I never really liked going there, but I went there with other buddies, just to be social. And I'm not proud of this, man, but I'm gonna say it. There was a gentleman who was of Middle Eastern descent. He was obviously from somewhere there, right? And I'm standing there with a drink, and he's looking towards me. And I'm going, okay. And then he keeps looking, and he keeps looking, drinking. So then in my mind, I'm going, he knows this about me, and I know this about, right? And so I go over, and I grab him. And I'm like, I don't know what you're looking at me for. I don't know what your plans are. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? And come to find out, he had friends that he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me. Right. But in my mind, he was going to do something to me. Right. So I feel like I had to be the aggressor. I had to go over there and make sure that didn't happen. And then that's when I knew, like, man, something's got to change. And so then that's when I finally went to the VA and tried to get some help there, which ended up costing me later down the road. But those are the type of things that I was working towards, trying to work through as I navigated probably from the time I got home through my 20s.
Did you have to go back to Iraq?
I didn't. I tried to go back. They wouldn't let me go back. I even tried to sign a waiver to go back. It says, I know that I just come back. I tried to go back a week later, which is really bizarre. But if you talk to enough veterans, they'll tell you why. Over there, I felt like that was my element. I didn't have to explain myself. Nobody thought I was weird acting. I knew what I had to do. I was very focused. The only thing could happen, you could die. That's easy. Over here, you got to make sure this bill gets paid. You got to run this errand. You got to take the kids here. You got to pick them up. It's almost, you know what it reminds me of? It's almost like being institutionalized. like people who've been in prison for a long time. And so that's kind of what happened. So I was ready to go back, but then I had my daughter and stuff, and my commander's like, "I'm not letting you go. You need to work on some things, right?" So that's kind of how that went.
So what happens to your career? Do you still stay with the Army or?
Yeah, so I was in for a couple more years, and then I got out. I got out at the end of my enlistment, so I got out in 2008,
And what do you
and it makes me
transition?
feel old, huh?
So that was what, a 7 year or 8 year? Actually, a little
Yeah,
longer than that.
eight and a half. They kept me longer than I was actually supposed to get out, and I don't know why. It just says, service member kept longer of no fault of his own. I don't know what kind of plans they had. But anyway, I remember I got those orders on February 1st of 2008, and I even tried to go back into the National Guard, and didn't end up doing that either. So I tried to go back several times, and then I just started doing the corporate thing. Where I started working at UPS and um, trying to climb the corporate ladder. I felt like I did pretty good there because of my drive, and I didn't care about like sleep, and I didn't care about long hours. And UPS, man, the reason why they can sponsor so much and they're such a big company is because if you're in management there and you're you're on salary, man, they're getting you like you're 60 hours.
They're working
Oh
you. I
man,
feel like that's any type of corporate
yeah.
job. Like I was talking to someone the other, or like my cousin, they'll give you good money, but they're getting every ounce of that. Like it might sound good making $200,000 a year at a corporation in New York City, but you got no life.
Yeah,
You're drained.
yeah,
I'd rather take a pay cut for a life.
yeah. No, 100%. And and here's the other thing about UPS. It's a good job, no matter where you are. Everybody, oh wow, that's a good job. So nobody wants to leave, and UPS isn't going anywhere. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's getting kind of, but at the time, nobody's taking UPS's place. So job security was a thing, and so they know all that, right? So they know they can do these certain things, and you're going to stay. But I didn't stay. I ended up leaving to become a mortgage banker. Uh, One of the guys I was in the military with, he was crushing it, man. Just really good at sales. I think he was having, $10,000, $13,000 months. And here I am, I'm working 60 hours, getting paid at 40. I'm making $40,000 a year, right? Not bad at that time, but I'm a young guy. You tell me, I can make 5 figures a month. I'm doing it. And so he's like, "Come on over, man. Come on over. You'd be great at this." It's the worst advice ever, right? So I put my 2 weeks in at UPS. They even offered me a promotion to stay, which would have been like $15,000 more a year. And I was like, "Nope," because I'm just thinking about what he was telling me. I'll leave UPS, right, and go over, and I was terrible mortgage banker, man. The only loans that I sold or closed were military or like law enforcement because it's very direct. He didn't have kids. He has a lot of kids now. I think it's funny, but he didn't have kids. So if he didn't do well, there's only him to take care of. So the commission game, right, was good for him. But for me, I had responsibilities, and so I was like, "You gonna buy? You want this loan or do you not want this loan? Because I got to go through my pipeline." I didn't say that, but in my head, I'm working it like that. This guy's on the phone talking about grills. "You like to grill? What kind of grill do you like?" And he's on the phone for hours with these people, and I'm going. But at the end of the month, he'd had like 6 loans closed at the end, and he'd killed it. And so I left there and went back into management and manufacturing, and then I continued to have these medical issues and was going back to the VA, and then I got rated at the VA, which kind of led to where we are now, as permanently and totally disabled due to my PTSD and traumatic brain injury and things. And I was like, permanently and totally disabled. What's that mean exactly? Like, they're like, "Well, we consider you unemployable." I'm like, "Okay, so what's that mean?" So essentially, you're retired, right? And so I said, "Okay, what do I do now?" Right? Got really depressed. Obviously, mission purpose gone. Trying to figure it out. And then in 2019, my wife and I, who's a therapist, we decided to start a nonprofit to help veterans who have PTSD and things, help them overcome it and get better. And so we're going to do this as volunteers. So we get a board of folks together, most of them veterans, and we formed this nonprofit in 2019. Um, Before that, it was just a Facebook group, right? It was a private Facebook group called Veterans Club. I mean, pretty basic. It was generic name on purpose. And my idea was to get 6 or 7 veterans together once a month to hang out, really. Well, that it was what happened. We took off, blew up, ended up becoming one of the top 5 fastest growing nonprofits in the country as it pertains to veteran issues, helped thousands of veterans. And then Fox, CNN, news, all these national news outlets, BBC, international was calling, asking me as a subject matter expert on PTSD, on veteran issues, on national security, foreign policy, I mean, all this stuff, right? And the organization's thriving. We're doing really good. Um, and again, I'm not getting paid to do this. I'm just doing this. It's my mission purpose. It's a passion project for me. My wife isn't getting paid to do it. We have a director of operations who's kind of running the ship, and I'm kind of the face, right? And so that's 2019. In 2023, I come back from Atlanta, Georgia, at a place called Emory University. They have a brain center, and I have to always go and get these kind of tune-ups, right? And I just come back, and we're sitting at the conference table, and I was talking to Corey, who's my director of operations. I was just getting briefed on what had went on. I have FOMO, right? And these 2 guys come in to our headquarters, and they asked to talk to me, and they had backpacks on, ball caps, like veterans. Excuse me. And he come and said, "Hey, can we talk to Jeremy?" And Corey's like, which he needs to get better at, but he was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, come on in." So he comes in, and um, they said, "Hey, we just want to have a conversation with you. We just want to talk to you about a few things." And I said, "Yeah, let's go upstairs to my office." We go upstairs to my office, and they come in. They're looking around at everything. This is a nice office. I said, "Oh, thanks." We sit down, and they're like, "How do you do this?" I'm like, it's kind of a vague question, but I'm like, well, I mean, there's a lot of people that are part of this, but we're passionate about what we do. And then he kept asking other questions, and I thought, this isn't a conversation. Like, this is an interrogation. Who are you? And then they finally showed their credentials, right? And they were agents with the VA, OIG. I didn't even know they had a criminal agents. Anyway, and he just puts this on my desk and he leaves it there, right? And I'm going, okay, well, how can I help you out? Because I'm just oblivious. I'm thinking, because we work with first responders, maybe they want to do something, right? And because we were partners with the VA. I was a consultant for their executive leadership team, both hospitals in the state. So it wasn't strange. And he goes, we're not here for the organization. We're here for you. And I said, for what? And he said, well, you've been charged, federally indicted for theft of government funds. I said, I don't understand. Like, how did I steal government money? Like, what's. And he says, well, look what you're doing. He's like, you're highly successful. You're running this nonprofit. You're all over the TV. And he's going through this laundry list of things. And I said, well, listen, man, I don't have an intellectual disability. I mean, there's more players in this nonprofit board. I have an advisory board. I have, volunteers. I mean, it's not the Jeremy Harrell show, and of course that doesn't matter when they got their eyes set on you, and he said, yeah, but your level of disability, like you shouldn't be able to do this. And I said, I don't know how that's medical. Like, I don't know how that fits. I mean, that's mental health is subjective. Some people handle it different ways. Some people get busy and they do things. Some people don't do anything. And so anyway, he hands me this summons and he says, I'm going to do you a favor and not arrest you. I'm going to allow you to go to court, but you got to go to court on this day. He gives me the summons, and I'm like, what is happening, man? So they get up and they go to walk out of my office, and he turns around. He goes, I've been following you for 1.5 years, and he says, you've done some amazing things for veterans and their families. And he walks out, and I'm just looking at this paper, like, what the hell? And they leave, and I go downstairs, and I said, Corey, I got to get out of here, man. I got to go talk to one of our advisors as an attorney, Carl. I said, I got to go talk to Carl. He's like, what just happened? I said, I have to call you in a little bit. Because the only thing I knew about indictments, I knew it was bad, but I just knew that the president got indicted a lot. But that was basically it. I had one speeding ticket from 2008 on my record. And so I go over to my lawyer's office. I said, Carl, can you read this? I don't know that I understand exactly what's happening. I had these 2 guys come in, and he's reading it, and he's crying, like tear. And this retired colonel, man, he don't cry, And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, Jeremy, this is serious. He's like, they're going to put you in prison for helping these veterans. I said, say that again. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm volunteering to do this. I'm not taking any money for this, not even mileage on my own like, I'm not. So anyway, he says, I'm not a criminal defense attorney. You got to find one. And he recommended a couple guys, and nobody wants to go to trial, right? So I have a hard time finding counsel that wants to go up against the feds. In my mind, this is a huge misunderstanding. Like, we're gonna get to the bottom of this. I want to be involved in the process. I want to be at these meetings. I'm thinking I'm going to get to be at these meetings, right? So I finally found a couple lawyers who were good lawyers who were willing to fight for it. And he says, we got a meeting with the prosecutor, and we're going to go try to resolve it. I was like, good. What time? Where is it and what time? So Jeremy, you can't go to this. I'm like, well, why can't I go? You're talking about me, He's like, that's not how it works. Like, you're indicted, right? Like, you can't go. And so he goes up to talk to the prosecutor, and at the very least, my attorney's just trying to get it to a misdemeanor of some sort. Well, the prosecutor makes a statement about, well, Jeremy, or not to me, but told my lawyer Nick. He said, I don't have much say over this case. My lawyer's like, well, I've been a prosecutor. Like, you choose the cases. Like, who has the say? And he says, it's up to Flagpole. And he's like, well, that's who I need to talk to. He's like, that's not going to happen. So we assumed it was out of D.C., right? We assumed the problem wasn't the problem. And then, so he calls me, and I remember we were at this outdoor, like, lunch thing, and I'm expecting to get good news. Like, I was so naive, man. He calls, I'm like, all right, we good, man? He says, no. He says they offered 6 months home confinement and, of course, restitution. And I said, well, what'd you say? He said, well, I told him that you were going to trial, and that you said that you've worn uniforms and ate shitty food for a long time in your life, and that you were never going to, plead. I was like, damn, I didn't tell him to say that, but oh well, so I was like, well, what was his response? He was like, he wasn't happy. So now all of a sudden we're trying to get ready for trial, right? And this whole time I'm out on pretrial because I went to arraignment. Here's an interesting story about arraignment. So I'm in arraignment, and again, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm asking a bunch of questions at the table. Apparently there's these microphones you can hear throughout the whole courtroom. And my lawyer's like, shut up, and I'm like, man, I got questions. You know what I mean? Like, I still don't know how all this happened. I never knew I was investigated. Nobody ever come to talk to me. Like, most suspects in any true crime get questioned. I never got questioned, so I'm all like, what's happening? So anyway, I get arraigned, and the only thing the prosecutor said, he says, I'm okay with him being out on pretrial, but he is not to be affiliated with his organization or talk to anybody that may have ever been a part of his organization. Well, we have thousands of people, man. Like, I don't know who all comes through there. And because I don't know, I can't talk to anybody now. I realized in 30 minutes, everything that I built was taken from me. That was one of the, like, initial, kind of nuggets that I got from him. I was like, wait a minute, this judge, he just took it. Like, so the judge was like, okay, I agree with that. So then the way it works where I was, the marshal takes you back that same day and does the fingerprints and the pictures, and he goes through the questions. So he's going through the questions. He asked me if I have a brain injury. I said, yeah, I do. And he said, can I ask, how you got it? And I said, well, I was in Iraq. And he goes, yeah, I was in Iraq. And I was like, oh, okay. Thanks for your service. He goes, when were you there? And I was like, well, I was there in 2003 and 2004. And where are you at? And I'm a little nervous because he's still an officer of the court, right? I don't know what's happening. And I told him where I was. He said, I was there. I said, you was there? You was there too? He said, yeah, I was with the 223rd MP company. I said, oh, okay. And the first thing he says, now understand, it's just them thinking that I wasn't eligible for the benefits that they said I was eligible for. He goes, man, you ever thought about, like, getting your VA disability? That was a hell of a deployment. And I thought, Ashton Kutcher's coming out of the closet somewhere. This is a terrible joke, right? So that doesn't happen, and so I say, well, that's kind of why I'm here. He's like, why? I don't get into it at that point because I'm like, well, I just want to talk about it right now. So he was confused, and we ended up doing our thing, and he said, hey, by the way, do you not use your front door? And I said, well, no, typically we go through the garage. Because he initially tried to serve the summons, but he said, I was going to come back, but the agent was dead set on serving you himself. He said, this is our job, but he'd come in here, he's like, no, I want to do it. And I thought, oh, so this is personal, right? I said, thanks for telling me that. So we left, and I told my attorney about that, and he goes, yeah. He goes, that's what I'm starting to figure out about this. Like, the problem isn't the problem kind of thing. And so I was out, and I had trial in August of 24, a 5-day trial. And everybody says, don't go to trial, right? You can't win. And I thought, or you might get the max, or there's the trial tax, all the things you know, right? And I'm just like, I don't care if they give me 20 years. I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. If I do something, I'll take it on the chin like a man. But listen, we saved thousands of lives of veterans who wanted to kill themselves. I got nothing for it other than the satisfaction of watching their lives improve, and it helped me therapeutically to help someone else. There ain't no way in hell I'm saying I did something I didn't do. And so, so the Lord's like, okay, well, we got to change our trajectory. So we started trying to figure out, like, how are we going to present this case? Well, they couldn't find any case law. Now think about how long the VA has been in existence. Now they found VA fraud, but VA fraud essentially was, guy says he can't lift anything, but he's on Instagram as a fitness influencer. That was a real case in Florida, right? Or was rated like me, but then was making $1 million in his own company somewhere, but never for somebody who volunteered, right? And I said, well, that's a good problem to raise. Like, so we started looking through all the VA regulations, and the first lawyer I told you about on my board was actually a VA disability lawyer. And he's like, there's no rule about volunteering. It doesn't say anything in the regulations about volunteering. I'm saying, okay, well, that's it. That's the case. There's no rule. I can't broke a rule that doesn't exist. Well, that's what I thought, right? So we get into trial, and immediately, and for people who haven't been on a federal trial, it's brutal, man. Like, I've been through a lot in my life, and I can just remember how it feels to sit in that seat and doing jury selection. They're all staring at you, right? They're all either thinking one or two things, either, oh, I'm sorry for this guy, or this guy's a dirtbag, right? Now, when they come in, they already think, well, there's got to be a reason the government has you in there, right? So you're under disadvantage immediately. Well, then we're talking about VA disability. It's a very complex process that most veterans don't even understand, right? It was just that same month my trial happened. It was in the Indiana Bar Association magazine as being so complex that it was very hard to work through. So now I have to assume this jury in 5 days can figure out the VA process. Otherwise, I'm done. Well, the reality is they couldn't. Anybody that was a veteran struck. Anybody that had any kind of tie to the VA in any way struck. They asked if anybody felt like they couldn't send me to prison. Well, the problem is this is in my own community. So there were 7 or 8 people who was like, I know what he does. I can't do that. This ain't right, right? And so they're gone. So we finally come up with a jury, and we're going through trial, and a couple things happened. The first thing that really should have closed the case was the agent got on the stand, and my lawyer said, is there anything that Mr. Harrell would have ever received that asked or that said that he couldn't volunteer? And the agent said no. He said, so there's nothing in the regulations about volunteering? No. I'm like, okay, that's done. So then the VA expert gets in, a guy who rates claims, right? It's actually my rater, 12 years experience, gets on, talks about, we don't always get it right. I thought, great. That's another one, right? And then he goes in. So my lawyer says, so if there was a veteran who volunteered at the animal shelter and he helped like these puppies go to the bathroom. And he did that for 40 hours a week. Would you look into him? No, not for something like that. He's like, I don't have anything else to say. And we're all thinking we're crushing it, really, you know? And, and then, and then the examiner who examined me, because they made me do a compensation and pension exam, which in my record, being permanently and totally disabled, you don't ever have any future exams. Well, that's not true. So many veterans that are listening to this don't ever get comfortable and think that you're out of the woods on that. So I go to this exam. Well, the whole time that I'm going to this exam, I don't know it, but there's like 6 or 7 agents at this VA hospital in Louisville watching me go to an exam, right? So I go to this exam, and it was like 3 hours long. That's a little bit on the long end. They're not short because they're asking you about your life. Well, when I get in there, I notice a couple things that's off. Now, I've been through like a few of these already, right? So I know the questions and things. So I go in. She doesn't shut the door all the way. This is a therapeutic intervention, like, 'cause it's HIPAA, right? I didn't pay too much attention to that, but I just know something's off. She's nervous. I can see it. And then I'm sitting there. Then a guy knocks at the door, and she goes to the door. They say something to each other. I couldn't make it out. That's unique. Come to find out my agent was there, right? And so she comes back, and she's asking me these questions. Now, in a compensation and pension exam, typically they ask you, like, what do you like to do? What are your hobbies? Or what keeps you from doing these things? Stuff like that. Well, they start out, first question. Mr. Harrell, are you part of any veterans organization or veterans club? Like my organization's Veteran Club Incorporated, right? And I said, yeah. And they're like, okay. You ever fly on an airplane? I'm like, this is not right. But I'm going to answer because I don't know what the hell's going on. I said, yeah, I fly on an airplane. Where to? Um, just places, you know. And then when they get into the religious part, I know something's wrong because governments don't typically ask that. But they said, do you volunteer in your church? I said, yeah. So what happened was the VAOIG created a new questionnaire to add on top of the normal questionnaire, basically using a psychologist as an extension of the law to interrogate me, which is unethical. It's against the ethics of a psychologist, which their ethic is to do no harm to your clients. You should have never agreed to do that. In fact, in Discovery, there was one psychologist who rated me the time before who would not participate in it because he said there was no right to consent. So he bowed out. The one who did go along with this, in an email, talks about how she has to check her liability limits on her licensure insurance. Now, why would you have to do that if you're doing the right thing, right? So she's asking me these questions, and I immediately know something's wrong. We get through that part, and then there's this other questionnaire. It's like 50 true or false questions. See, they're just not really used to people pushing back, I think. So we get ready to do this, and I said, yeah. I said, what if it isn't true or false? Because, it's not that easy. These are mental health things, right? She goes, well, you just choose the best one that you think fits, your thought. Well, that's not an accurate way to get an accurate assessment on somebody, right? So even though I made that comment, I go through do these assessments. Well, in trial, she brings up that my results were off the chart, that they seemed like they weren't they weren't truthful. But never does bring up that I made the case that said, hey, I don't think these are true or false, some of these questions. And so my lawyers asked her, so did you know before the exam that Mr. Harrell was under investigation? She said, yes. He says, so you had confirmation bias? She says, potentially. How do you do an accurate assessment on somebody that's being investigated, especially when he doesn't know that he's been investigated? And she says, well, I just answer the questions from the questionnaire that's in front of me. And she says, so the investigator was in touch with you throughout this whole process? She said, yeah, in fact, I had to put boundaries on him because he was interfering in my job. I mean, I'm thinking, okay, there's another 3-pointer, right? Like she get confirmation biased. The guy wouldn't leave her alone. So she gets off the stand, and my lawyer makes one final cross examination on the VA expert and says he was a mathematics major undergrad at this really smart school called Transylvania in Kentucky, right? And so he goes up there. He says, "So let me just give you a scenario." He says, "So if my client worked for minimum wage in Kentucky, and he didn't make more than a poverty threshold, but he worked 80 hours a week as a greeter at Walmart, would we still be here today?" He says, "No." He says, "So he can make money, work double the amount of what you all think he's working, and that's okay. But he can't volunteer at a nonprofit." And he said, "Well, I didn't say that. I'm just saying that he would be able to make that money and work that many hours," which just contradicts each other, right? So he don't say anything. Lawyer's like, "I have no further questions," right? So we go back, and I'm like, "I think this is good. I think we're going to be one of the 1%, right?" Day 5 comes. It's late on Friday, and they go back to deliberate. And I remember the judge before sending him back. "Now listen, you're going to change this man's life." It was almost like he was trying everything he could, right? And because from my perspective, my attorney's perspective, he didn't like the case anyway. Imagine what they deal with, and they got this guy in here giving his time and effort, right? So they go back an hour and 40 minutes later. Now I have 2 terabytes of discovery. You can't go through all that. They had a smoke break. They ate pizza, right? And I'm watching them do all this going, how do you even eat right now? Like if I had somebody's like freedom I wouldn't even be able to eat. So they come back and they read off the verdict. Now, before he read off the verdict, I felt like it was going to be bad because he said the courtroom was full. We had 250 people in this courtroom. So he says, "Before I do this, I want to make sure there's order." He's going through that whole motion. I'm like, oh, shit. And so he says, "Mr. Harrell, you're found guilty." And dude, I felt like my legs were going to fall out from under me. And I'm like, my first thought was, how in America do you go to prison? Do you be a convicted felon for helping somebody for free? Like, how does that work, right? And so I go to ask my lawyer that, and he goes, "Jeremy, first I got to keep you out." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, they're wanting you to be remanded now." I'm like, man. So so the prosecutors, saying, "Your Honor, like we think he should be, you know, or detained now." And I remember the judge saying, "Well, you have that right," and he's going through this legal stuff. And my lawyer says, "Wait a minute, Your Honor, this is the same guy that the prosecutor allowed to go to Florida on pretrial and help the disaster relief for the 2 hurricanes that they had." Because the other thing I do is I'm a chaplain for the Billy Graham Foundation and Samaritan's Purse. So I would go down and I would minister to the victims, and then also to the ones down there rebuilding the house, right? It's the only thing I asked to do on pretrial. So I flew down there on my own dime to do that. And so he brought that up. He said, "So all of a sudden now, you know, he's a danger, or he's an escape," and the judge said, "Well, no, I think if we learned anything this week, we've learned that Mr. Harrell is not a danger to his community." So the prosecutor's like throwing out all the, "No, but right here it says," like they were dead set. Well, eventually, come to the point where he's like, I'm gonna allow Mr. Harrell to be out on bond, and we'll revisit this in a couple of days. And if we decide that we're gonna, remand him, we'll bring him back. He'll report to U.S. Marshal." And dude, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, man, these guys hate me. Like, why do they hate me so much for helping people, right? And so we leave, and then we come back a couple months for sentencing. Sentencing was very unique. It was a shit show. In fact, my lawyers, they've been practicing law since the early 90s, and so they've never seen one like it. So it was like the prosecutor turned it into a mini trial, right? But what really stood out is is that the prosecutor, I submitted 70 letters, I think, maybe 69 or 70, and the prosecutor took the time to go pick excerpts out of all these letters. And he called the people that wrote the letters, and many of them are in the courtroom, called them keyboard warriors. Jeremy's loyalist. He's deceiving them. These letters should be aggravating. Like, they say that he's been targeted. They say that he's been selectively prosecuted. They say that this was a guy giving everything he had to his community. And in fact, Mr. Harrell was taking from his community, going through that whole motion, but was like visibly angry, like to a level where he was kind of hopping around. And the judge let him do his thing. And then my lawyer said, my client would like to use his allocution right. And I didn't testify, so it was the only time I really talked in there. And the judge was like, I'm interested in hearing from you. So I go up, and I don't talk about me in that situation really. I tell him the whole why about everything, right, from childhood. We get done with that, and then he says, before I go any further, I want to address the court. And he said, obviously, there's a lot of people here today. He said, we have this live streaming in other courtrooms in this courthouse. He says, but I read every one of those letters, and I don't agree with Mr. Chapman, even though he's a fine prosecutor. I don't agree with his assessment of these letters. I believe everything that was written in these letters. Now, he didn't say, I believe everything except for the targeting or the selective. He said everything, right? And he says, all the good work he's done with Veterans Club, I believe that's who he is. And I'm going, well, damn, this is a good thing, right? So I try to walk back. He says, no, mister, I want you to stand right there. So I stand there. I'm at this podium. He says, I want you to turn around. I'm like, oh, man. So I turn around. He says, look at these people. I said, I know, Your Honor. I said, I love them. And he said, they're obviously here to support you. He says, most often we have an empty courtroom during sentencing. He said, it's very sad, actually. He said, but you obviously have a lot of people, who support you and care about you. And it really did something to him, man. And so I turned around again, and he says, what you've done is admirable. He says, it wasn't like that you were out buying boats and fancy vacations. You didn't personally enrich yourself. In fact, it cost you to do this good work. So in my mind, I'm walking out, right, with something. I mean, I know I got a guilty verdict, but I'm walking out with probation or something, right? Well, he says, I wanted to tell you that first. He said, however, when there's a guilty verdict, I'm duty sworn to sentence. And the government has asked that you would have 21 to 24 months, 3 years supervised release. And he says, what I think my other colleagues would do and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 6 months to the Bureau of Prisons, and then 6 months home confinement as part of your year supervised release. Dude, the prosecutor lost it, right? Because I got basically the same sentence as I would have got on a plea deal, right? And so the prosecutor looks at the judge and he says, since you're punting everything I'm trying to do, can we talk about, forfeiture? And the judge said, so we're using football analogies in a federal courtroom? And he just didn't like it. I thought the prosecutor was going to get a contempt. The dude's bouncing up and down. I'm giving my allocution. He's going, no, 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 that kind of thing. But man, I tell everybody, Ian, to this day, no man has ever complimented me so much as the judge did before he sent me to prison. And so, once that was over, the marshal come over and he said, you got to keep going. And I was like, at the time I'm going to prison for this. You know what I mean? I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. Like, look what this has led me to. Right. And he goes, but you're the man, man. He's like, I've been following you. He's like, I'm part of your group. I'm part of your veterans organization. I never knew that. Right. And so he's like, you got to keep going. So, we walked out of sentencing, and I had to surrender a month later. I wanted to do it sooner than later. You know how people put that off. I'm like, let's go and get it done. So in January, I self-surrendered to, which is weird, by the way. And I'm sure someone on this show has said it before, but it's like checking yourself into a hotel, right? It's just very hard to do. I almost thought, I know county jail sucks, right? We hear all the stories about county jail, but man, there's something about like taking yourself to prison. So, my wife and my kids, we went down to Ashland, Kentucky, where FCI Ashland is, and we spent the night in that town I didn't wanna waste my time with them driving the next because I'm 2.5 hours away. And, what a weird night, man, to be out there with your family, trying to have dinner, and just knowing that you're getting ready to leave. And, and they're all freaking out and scared, right? And it's all over the news, and that made this so much difficult is all the coverage that this got, and they covered every day of my trial, but I couldn't say anything. So I'm sure the jurors were scanning through Facebook, clicking, you know what I mean? It was just never as fair as it's supposed to be. But we're down in Ashland. We get up the next day, and I'm filming a documentary, and so they were there the next morning getting some B-roll and doing some interviews with my kids and things, and just to watch them, like, talk about what it does to them. Like, this is what we're supposed to do. Like, my dad was doing what he was called to do. He's doing what he's, and they just don't understand, man, how that can happen. And, and so they follow me to the prison. I was like, "Hey, you can't you can't bring no camera on here." Like, and he's like, "What about a drone?" I kid you not. I said, "Listen, I can't go in like that. Like, you can't fly a drone. Are you kidding me? Like, don't fly a drone." Right? So he's like, "All right, I won't fly a drone." Um, so I go to walk in, say bye to my family, really hard. I mean, I go to walk in, and I'm walking up, man, to the prison. I look at the flagpole, and it has the Army flag, the American flag, and of course all the branches. And I just remember going, how in the hell did serving those two flags honorably get me to this place? And for caring about the other ones that serve those two flags, or all those flags, really. And I just had this moment of like, this doesn't make any sense. And so I have my Veterans Club shirt on because we had been filming. And so I walk in, and the CO at the checkpoint there is like, "You a veteran?" And I'm like, "I am." He's like, "What are you doing here?" And I told him, and his exact words was, "You got to be shitting me." I said, "I wish I was, man, but I definitely wouldn't be here any other." So we go through, all the checks and stuff, and then there's these this is in Kentucky, right? So there's these COs who are coming around. They're like, "Oh, hey, Jeremy, like, I have y'all's hoodies, man. I have some T-shirts. They're part of this organization that we've helped their families at some level. Right now, all of a sudden, they think I'm there because I'm touring or doing some sort of like jail ministry, which I do, right? And I'm like, no, I'm here to serve time, and they just can't believe it. And it's very awkward for them. It's awkward for me, and so we go downstairs, and every veteran in that prison, tell him, tell her, tell him, So I'm telling the story all the way through, and then you get to the strip search and do all that. And he never did give me a break on the strip search, though, man. I thought, okay, well, we got a little bit of rapport here. No, he was serious about that. So we did that, and then of course that was at the low. You check in at the low, and then after you go through all the stuff, he's like, okay, now what you got to do is you got to walk over to the camp. I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You go and you walk over. There's a path." I'm like, "This is a setup or something." Nobody Sure enough, man, like some other guys that had come from other prisons and, had been in higher security institutions, they're tripping out too. Like, I ain't got no handcuffs on my feet, like, so we're walking over there. We're just walking through the community. There's 4 schools in that area. People are driving through, and it just felt weird. I'm like, man, they must really not, either they must really trust us, or, so we finally get over there, and I'm going to get my stuff, right? And they're doing a tour, and then they're taking me to my unit. I'm 45. I was 44 then. This was just last year. I asked for the 50 plus unit because that's what I was told by a friend of mine who was a senator who done time there. And I even tried to name drop him. Thought that might help. It didn't. But I was like, "Hey, Jerry Lundergan?" He says, "Yeah." He says, he told me to ask you specifically about the 50 plus unit. He goes, "How old are you?" And I said, 44. He said, "No." It's like, oh man. So where do I go? I go to this unit, drug dealers, gang members, and I'm like the old man. And every day in there was like a music video. You know what I mean? And I just remember walking in, and everybody's staring at you. Now, everybody has cell phones, which, I mean, I had no idea. Like, I'm walking through there, and of course they didn't have them then, but I'm walking through there, and then we're going around, like, you got to walk in kind of a horseshoe. We come around, and they my cellie is a Syrian guy, and I'm like, this is a sick joke, right? We ended up being real cool, but initially, like because of my experience in the Middle East, I was a little apprehensive, to be honest, right? I mean, you're going to be apprehensive anyway because you're in prison, and all you see is what you see on TV, right? And of course, they sensationalize it stuff. And then not only that, but I don't know, this guy isn't and so um, I get in there, and he ended up being really cool, that giving me things, and I'm just like, hey man, like don't give me anything if you're going to try to. You think I need to owe you something? And he's like, no, we don't. It's not like that. So everybody, and what I noticed really quickly is how segregated everything was by race. And and I come from a place where they were all racists, right? And so I was having a little bit of hard time with that. And of course, the military is the most diverse organization in the world. Well, these guys were bringing stuff, and then eventually there were three guys from the Hispanics, the whites, and the blacks who come by and was like, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm serving time here." They're like, "Man, listen, we looked you up, and don't nobody go to prison for doing what you do." And I said, "Man, that's what in a perfect world, you're absolutely right. But I don't know if you've seen that pesky little DOJ press release that pops up the first time you put my name in or not. But that's what it is." And it's like, "Yeah, but they could they could make a fake one of them and put you." And I said, "Listen, I'm not a cop, right? But they got." So what happened was, they know I'm a CEO. Well, the miscommunication was I was a CO, right? And so they're like, "You're a CO." I said, "I'm not a CO." You know what I mean? I guess you could kind of consider me that in the military at one point, but I was like, I was a CEO, right? And so finally we hashed all that out, and I just said, "Hey, listen, here's the deal. Like, whatever you all got going on, that's your business. I don't want no part of it. I don't want to be with any certain group of people. I'm here for 6 months. I'm going to do what I need to do to get through these 6 months, and I won't bother you, and you don't bother me. But when you figure out that the ways that you're doing is not going to work for you, and you need some assistance, you can come holler at me, right?" And then they never bothered me again, man. And so they also found out that I was a chaplain. So at that prison, they didn't have a chaplain at the time, and so they're like, "Hey, Jeremy, can you preach Sunday services?" And I said, "Yeah, man, I'll do that." So that's what I did. So I preached Sunday services, and I did Bible study twice a week. And there was no NA or AA, so some of the folks who had addiction issues, they would come to Bible study. It was the closest thing. And and I would do that. And then, I had to find a job, right? It's funny how the government's okay with me doing anything now, right? So in naivety, I'm looking around for a job list, like a job posting, right? So I go into the counselor's office, and you're only supposed to do that twice a week for 1 hour. You can't just walk in there. I just walk in there, and I'm like, "Look, I know you all want me to get the job, but I don't see any listings." He's like, "What do you think this is, Indeed.com?" And I said, I mean, I don't know. Like, how am I supposed to know? I'm just trying to follow the rules, man." He's like, "You got to walk around and ask people." And I was like, "All right." And that's when I was like, nothing about this place is organized or makes sense. It's like controlled chaos, right? So I go everywhere I go to Unicore. I don't have enough time. Even though, like at UPS, I was an industrial engineer, I had all this experience. I went in there with like a resume. I was like, "This is what I've done," right? He didn't give a shit about that, right? And he's like, "Well, you're not here long enough. Go to the garden. No, you're not here long enough." Everywhere I went, I wasn't there long enough. So I go back to, to the counselor because he's on me. I was like, "Look, I went everywhere. They said I don't have enough time." And he's like, "Look, I'm going to put you down as a compound orderly. Just stay out of sight, out of mind kind of thing." So what I did, I would sit at a table every day, and I would kind of counsel men, like talk to them about things, right? First, it was more like faith stuff because I'd always had my Bible. And then it was started turning into about life stuff. And I remember them saying, how are you so calm, man? Like, I know I'm supposed to be here. Like, how are you so calm?" I'm like, what's the alternative? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not necessarily calm, but what would be the point of me being pissed off every day, right? I said, but maybe the point is so I can talk to you. Maybe the point is so I can preach Sunday services, right? I said, I've always done jail ministry, and every prisoner jail I'd ever been into prior, the guys would tell me, Jeremy, we love what you say, but man, you're just never going to know. You're never going to know what it feels like unless you're on the other side. And I said, you're probably right. I'll never know what it wasn't maybe 3 months after that. Because the biggest jail in the city of Louisville, we have a Valor program there for veterans who are incarcerated. I'd go there every Thursday and talk to these guys. And I said, yeah, I probably won't ever know that. And sure enough, I'm sure because they would always say, when I went in there, they would always say, I saw you on TV. Now they're probably like, damn, what happened? But I'm not allowed in there right now, But nonetheless, man, so I just used that time to help broken men. And it was fruitful. From what I understand, when I left, the last sermon I gave was on Mother's Day last May. And that place where I used to sit, we don't have nothing in there, so they just kind of took a piece of paper from the legal pad and taped my name on it like it was my spot. But man, I really, despite being in prison, and I would never want to do it again, I felt like I used the time to the best of my ability to be productive. And I know there's some men in there who have reached out to me since they've gotten out that was really helpful for them. What they like most about me, and going back to how I felt in the military about, respecting culture, respecting religion, is I didn't judge anybody. Um, I just didn't care. I know we all want the same things, and really, I never cared about what they done. Now, just to be clear, in a camp, there's a limit on what kind of crime you can have, right? There's no chomos or anything like that that would be hard, just to be honest. That would be hard for me. But because of my faith, obviously I would still try to be helpful when I could, but I didn't have to deal with that. But yeah, man, so I spent all my time, kind of doing that. And I remember like a lot of the COs, they it's almost like they try to stay away from me. And I thought that was a bad thing, but in reality, I think they were trying to be helpful. But I would be sitting somewhere and there'd be a CO I've never met walk by and go, "You're doing good, hang in there." Stuff like that. Or they would just call me by my last name. They wouldn't call me inmate or anything like that. So they were trying to kind of show me a little bit of respect, but now the one thing they didn't do that I had to ask them to do, and I know this is a little bit controversial, but it got to a point where when I would have visits, and I had visits every weekend, thankfully, they wouldn't always search me. And I was like, people are noticing, you know how it is. Like, they're like, why won't they ever search you? And I'm like, man, I don't know the rules here as far as that goes. Like, I don't know but it's everybody else, right, in that room. And so I had to ask, like, I need you to do that for me. So they would randomly catch me in the library or something when there's people in there, right, and say, all right, Harold, put your arms out, and do the thing, right? But man, I was real worried about that because they already had this thought that maybe I was, a plant. Now you're not searching me. Um, but man, it was good to get out of there. I really only did, honestly, 4 months out of the 6 because of the First Step Act. And then I went to a halfway house. This is where the story gets a little bit wild, man. I went to the halfway house. I wasn't supposed to go to a halfway house. And here's what people got to understand about prison. If you are rational, there's no rationale in that place. Like, I remember being told that I had to go to a halfway house. I go into the secretary's office and I say, hey, I think there's some confusion. And he's just looking up at me. Looks like he hates his life. You know what I mean? Looking up at me. What? I said, I'm not supposed to go to a halfway house. I'm supposed to go directly to home confinement. Let me check. Nope. Says halfway house. I'm like, yeah, I think that's wrong. He's like, it ain't about what you think. I don't care about what that kind of thing. You're going to have. So anyway, we get out there. My wife comes and gets me. We got 2 hours to get to this halfway house. And I remember we got McDonald's breakfast, which is a terrible idea after not eating that kind of food in a long time. We finally got to the halfway house, and I think I was supposed to be there, I want to say maybe a week or 2 weeks. But really thought that I'd get there, they'd give me a bracelet and tell me to go on. that didn't happen. Um, so after like 9 days, at this point, it's about 7 days past my home confinement date. I had already asked, like, the director of this was a dismissed charities, they do a lot of the halfway houses in Lexington, Kentucky, and I said, I'm supposed to be on home confinement." She started laughing. She says, "Yeah, that's not how it works. There's a lot of paperwork involved in this." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about the paperwork. I'm just telling you what, like, if there's a date, it's a date. I don't really care about your paperwork, you know." And she says, "Mr. Harrell, I can assure you that no one knows you're here. We'll try to process that. We still have to do a home visit and all this kind of stuff." And so I call my wife because you can have a cell phone. Just can't have social media, but you can have a cell phone in halfway house. I call my wife and I say, "Hey, they're not letting me leave." Well, she gets on X. She puts a post. She tags Savannah. Savannah sees it and she calls my wife. It's like, "What's happening?" My wife tells her. So then she calls the director of the Bureau of Prisons, Billy Marshall, and says, "This guy's supposed to be out of there," right? And all this is happening. I'm not aware of it really. And then all of a sudden, my wife sends a screenshot of this guy that was acting on behalf of the BOP, and he's at an airport, and he takes a picture of the gate and says, "Jeremy Harrell, we're coming to get you out," right? Like it was real dramatic. And I said, "Aaron, you can't talk to all these people, man. You can't believe this. They don't work this way, you know." And she says, "No, no, Jeremy, I think this is going to work." And I'm like, so then the next day she calls me again. She says, "He wants to call you." And I said, "Okay, have him call me." So he calls me and he says, "We're coming today." He says, "We're going to stage at this." And I still don't really know this guy's title, just to be clear. Like, I don't know really like how he's associated with the BOP or if he even is now. But he says, "We're going to stage, and we got Fox and all these people. Like, we're going to stage, and then we're going to come over at this certain time." Right. So I was like, "Well, I'm going to talk to the director here because I'm still trying to be, I don't know, polite, I guess." So I go into the director. I'm like, "Look, I just want to go home like peacefully. And there's an opportunity to do that now, but it won't always be that way." That's kind of a dangerous thing to say as an inmate, right? Because it could be threatening or whatever. Well, she doesn't pay attention to me, man. Then all of a sudden, a couple hours later, I'm standing in the hallway at the halfway house, and there's this other guy. He's looking out the door, and I hear him go, "Hey, what's all these news cameras doing out there?" And I just started laughing. And then the director comes because they have this like little room. They come out of this little room, and she looks right at me. And I said, "I tried." You know what I mean? And she was like, "Well, you can't leave." So then this guy, Derek, comes up and I mean, he just walks in, dude. And he says, and I'm standing there, like he had texted me and said, "Hey, get your stuff and be by the door." So I have my laundry bag. That's all I have, my laundry bag full of stuff. And he comes in the foyer there and he's like, "Mr. Harrell, let's go." I was like, "Wait a minute." I need some sort of paperwork or I ain't trying to get an escape charge. And then they're over here going, "Mr. Harrell, if you leave, you'll go back to Ashland. If you leave." And so I'm like, "Hey, I need some sort of, of course, I haven't had this much stimulation, right, in a very long time." So, and then now they start arguing, right? And he says, "No, I'm with the Bureau of Prisons," and he's got the Bureau of Prisons comms director on the phone, communicating messages and saying no, he is good to leave, like per orders of the BOP director. And so they call their people, right, and their people are like, "No." And then they come out and say, "Hey, you need to get off federal property." And he says, "This is quasi-federal property. In fact, it's only federal property because we have a contract where we pay you to do this. And if you don't figure this out in 15 minutes, you won't have a contract." Now, dismissed charities is all over the place, right? So I'm like, "Damn, this is great." So it's drawing attention, right? And my wife's on the phone. She's out in the parking lot too. There's a senator out there, and so so she's like, "Jeremy, are you all right?" I'm like, "I just don't know what's happening, man, and I need like some documentation or something." Um, so anyway, he gets the director on the phone actually, and the director tells them like, "Yes." And so finally, their director wants to talk to me, and she says this. I guess they had some extra outside communication because she says, "Why are you still on my property?" And I said, well, because your director here wouldn't let me leave. I'm ready to leave. She goes, you are to leave now, and you are to go straight home, because I had the little wrist monitor, you are to go straight home. You are not to speak to media. And I said, okay. So then I hang up the phone, and then the director there says, he can't talk under BOP policy. He can't. So then Christy's like, no, he has permission to do an interview. And I'm just like, what's that? So we go out, and then they threaten to call the local police. He says that's good. We'll call the FBI Louisville office and have them come out to Lexington, and then we'll just sort it out that way. So they didn't want that. So I walk out, and there's Lexington police officers there. Now, keep in mind, when you're getting ready to leave, they say don't have any contact with law enforcement, right? He's walking towards me, Mr. Harrell, and I don't know what's happening, and I'm like, yes, that's me. And he goes, listen, we're just going to make sure you can go out there and talk to them, and that these folks don't bother you. I'm like, this is awesome, right? So when I get out there, though, my wife has a phone. Savannah's on the phone. She gets on the phone. She says, Jeremy, I'm so sorry this happened to you. She said, I will continue to fight for you. She said, this, thank you for serving our country. Should never happen to somebody that's done what you've done, all that kind of thing. And I said, okay. I said, I appreciate you. Thank you for your help. And I'll talk to you soon when I can get a clear mind. And because all these cops are around me while I'm talking to her. So we get off the phone, and then sure enough, I go out to the sidewalk, man, and do these interviews. There's like 5 or 6 stations out there. While I'm doing it, the guy, Scott Derrick, he's filming it. And then I guess he sends it up to BOP, because then after that interview, I got in the car and went home. I live about 45 minutes from there. So when I pulled in my neighborhood, in my driveway, there were 3 news channels. So I'm like, man, I just really want to watch the halfway house off of me and chill with my kids, And so I talked to them really quick, and then the director calls me himself, right? And he says, hey, this is Director Billy Marshall. He's like, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm doing better now, now that I'm home. And he said, good, that's good. He said, listen, he said, I don't like what happened. He said he had just been, now to be fair, he'd only been appointed a month before that, right? And he says, I have a team, I'm working to develop a team to make sure this doesn't happen, which ended up being like Josh Smith and Rick Stover and these other guys. He said, I almost got them. He said, but we're not there yet. He said, but I'd like for you to transition quickly so that you could come up here with the Grizzlies and testify before Congress about your experience. And I said, yeah, just give me some time. You know what I mean? And so we get off the phone, and then it was a couple hours later, I get an email of talking points from the Bureau of Prisons, from their comms director, sends me talking points that I can talk to the media about. Now, keep in mind, I'm still under BOP custody, right? Like I'm nervous. Like, number one, can I even talk to the director? Like, is that legal? Now I have talking points where it says a trusted resource to the director of the Bureau of Prisons. I'm like, I'm an inmate. This is insanity. So I call, my lawyer, and I'm like, here's what's happening. He's like, what is, he said, your case, man. He says, listen, you can't do that right now. He says, they're still the government, and you're still an inmate. He says, now, if they want to, give you a paycheck and help you resolve this situation legally, well, then we can talk. But until then, I think you need to let me be the intermediary. And dude, that was me getting out. Like, all happened in that one day. And so then I got on, I got off home confinement through the BOP, then got on probation. So I go and meet with my probation officer, and he says, somebody called here. He said about a pardon. And I said, oh, that's awesome, but no more information. He says, now, if that happens, he said, the only time I've ever seen it happen in my 4.5 years has been one time, and the guy had been out of prison forever, He says, and when that happens, I get a call for information from the pardon attorney's office. He says, but I hope you get it, right? And so I go on, right? And then it was this April where I sent him a text, and I said, because I always have to ask to go outside the district. See, a lot of people don't understand that either. My hometown is the next county over from me, but that's the edge of the districts. So every time I want to go to my family, I have to ask. So I send a text message, usually on a Thursday, say, hey, can I get permission to go run errands, see family, do that? and he approved it. But then he said, by the way, the White House called and they were asking for information, which I will send to them next week. And I was driving. So I pull over because I'm like, the last time he told me this, he said that was a prelude to, to clemency, right? So I called my wife and I said, I don't know what this means. And it may not mean anything, but this is just what I was told. She was, everybody's excited, right? And so that was March. And since then I've been working with advocates who have been meeting with people to try to get this done. It's so much different than what people could imagine it looks like. It is not as simple as filling out an application on the OPA website. In fact, I was first told not to do that, and then I was told to do that. And then when I did that, it was kind of quiet for a while. And then, of course, we had folks, and I think maybe Savannah was one who was advocating for me in D.C. and had other folks presenting my case there. And then the application never moved until all this stuff happened with U.S. and Iran. And when it happened, BBC calls and they say, hey, we're in Kentucky because we want to interview you about your thoughts on, this war. And I'm like, I thought that was unique because I hadn't been getting a lot of calls since the conviction, right? Because I call it assassination of a source is what the local news did, right? But anyway, I said, yeah, sure, I'll talk about it. And I said, where do you guys want to talk about it? And they're like, well, you do horse stuff. And I said, I do. And they're like, well, can we do it at the farm? That's always good everybody wants to do it at the farm, right? And I said, you want me to hold a horse too? And they're like, actually, yeah. So we get to the farm and she asked me, obviously, my thoughts on it. And I was for it, right? I'm still for it to an extent until it starts boots on ground. Then I get a little, but I was like, yeah, I support the president's, and the Secretary of War's, military action. And then she asked me this. She goes, so in your opinion, like, I forgot how many months he'd been president at that point, but she said, since he's been president in his second term, what do you think? I mean, do you think he's done a great job? And for the most part, I do, right? And I said, yeah. I said, I think there's been a lot of improvement in a lot of different areas, and I say what I say. And well, when she airs that, she sends me the link, and on the link, the first thing she says, she's got me walking with a horse, and it says, Harrell, an Iraq combat veteran and Trump supporter. And she goes on, and I said, so I send it to my, advocates to send up, like, here, send this. And, and then NPR calls, right, which I don't typically do NPR, but NPR calls and says, hey, we're going to have some veterans on. It's a show called On Point. It's a big show. We're going to have veterans on, and you would be a good counterpoint based on the interviews that I've seen you do. These veterans generally aren't supportive of the war. And I said, so you want me to walk into the lion's den, right? And he said, yeah. So I do that interview, and pretty much they're coming at me hard. The host is about they don't like Trump. Trump's a liar, all these things. And I'm just defending. And it was an hour show, man. And I leave, get in the car. He's from, I don't know, wherever he's from. He sends me an email. He's like, sir, you did an amazing job as a counterpoint. So when I looked at the transcript, as soon as it come out, I was like, send it. So I did that like 4 or 5 times. Then all of a sudden, get an email. My lawyer gets an email, says that the review of my application, they need me to do 3 things. I had too many letters. They wanted me to find the top 3, right? And then I had to do, you'll think this is funny, I had to do a release of information so that they could do a background check on me, which I think, I was like, man, they didn't ask for permission the first time they did that. So I send that in, and then all of a sudden things get rolling. And I'm like, man, this is weird. So I don't know, like, was it the advocates? Was it because I defended him with this war as a veteran? When I think at the time there was only 17% of veterans who were for it on a station that he hates, right? I won't say hates. I don't want to speak for president, but has publicly shown disdain for it at times. But nonetheless, man, that's where we are now. I just got off supervised release a couple weeks, or actually Monday, and I'm here today talking about this. But that's kind of where the story is at this point. But crazy ride.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out, the judge was so on your side, but he still gave you a kind of a screwed up sentence
Yeah,
because, I mean, you look at some people that they'll get a day or they'll get time served because I think the minimum he would have to give is like a day if he's not doing like time served or like house arrest. He
mhm.
could have done just house arrest. He could have just done probation. Could have done a week.
Yeah,
He could have done 30 days. So
yeah,
I don't know. I just don't. It sounds like he was probably playing politics a little bit too,
yeah,
to kind of meet in the middle. Because I mean, my judge met in the middle between what we were asking for and what the prosecutors.
yeah.
But I don't know. It just seems like he didn't have to give you 6 months. But also at the same time, a year supervised releases is on the low end. Normally they give like 2 or 3 or
Right,
if not higher.
right. 3 or 5, I think.
What about restitution? What do you order with that?
Yeah. So restitution is they claim that I owe $207,000. And where they get that number is they went back to the date that I signed my initials on a DocuSign when they did the articles of incorporation for the nonprofit. Me and all the board members had to sign the DocuSign. And I guess when you sign your initial, you become, they say I became employable at that time,
Mm.
which if that's the way you're doing it, then everybody who has any level of disability isn't if they can sign their initial. But that's what they went back to because they can build the case and make the case higher, and the guidelines because of the money's higher, right? I think over 150,000, it changes dramatically. And so they did that, and then they try to impose forfeiture. And just recently, last month actually, I was up in Detroit at the Sixth Circuit. We were appealing the forfeiture allegation because of the way they did. They amended the judgment when I was in prison 3 times. Never told me about it. I was never present, right? Never knew anything. They continue to add punishment. Well, the Constitution says that anytime someone gets sentenced, they have to be physically present. You have to orally hear it, and you have to be able to respond and make sure it's clear or object, whatever you want to do. Well, I never got that option. They were, in fact, they amended the judgment the day that I surrendered to federal prison, which I felt was odd because I knew I couldn't do anything about it now. I mean, I could, but it wouldn't be as easy, right? I couldn't just go down to my attorney's. So, actually, a big law firm in D.C. called Paul Weiss, they picked up that case pro bono, and we went to Detroit. And what's interesting is the chief judge of the Sixth Circuit. There's, I think, 16 judges, and then he's the chief. He was on my panel. And when you think about that, it's like it's $108,000 extra, right, for the forfeiture. So it would be over 3 total. But you think, man, that's kind of a small case for him to want to settle on, right? But I think why is this case is so unusual, and because there hasn't been another like it, that it could be one of the cases that sets precedents, right? And I think, but I do remember being up there, and one thing, the government always talks about waste, fraud, and abuse, right? So we're in this big courtroom in Detroit. There's a plaque outside the courtroom that says the $2 million courtroom. Right. And I'm going, damn, you talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. I think spent $2 million in this courtroom. You go in, there's marble, there's columns. I mean, it looks like something out of the Roman Empire. But so the way, for people that don't know, the way oral arguments work is each side gets 15 minutes. You can use that 15 minutes however you like, but that's all you get. Well, the person that showed up for the government wasn't my prosecutor or wasn't the person that wrote the brief against me. It was, from what I understand, it was the AUSA who kind of just signs all the orders. And I thought, this is kind of like their Super Bowl, right? If you're an attorney and you get to argue during oral argument, because that only happens about 13% of cases, like you'd want to be a part of that, right? And I was like, maybe this is managed retreat, Maybe they're like, well, we're going to send you up there just to get it done because you have to be there. But it's hard to beat constitutional things. So my lawyer gets up there and she says, I want to speak for 12, but I want to reserve 3 minutes for a rebuttal after the government. And so the government goes first and basically just, Mr. Harrell knew forfeiture was coming. It was in his indictment. And one of the 3 judges happened to be a forfeiture attorney in her past, and she brought that up. She said, I was a forfeiture attorney. And she says, do you think it's okay that Mr. Harrell wasn't present during this part of sentencing? And for some reason, and I'm not a lawyer, but this just seems like common sense. She says, not in this case. So why this case? Right? Why would it be okay in this case if it's against the Constitution, not any other case? It really just shows personal animus, right? It just shows that they continue to try to hurt me. And so that drew, the judge kind of perked up a little bit. And then she had like 7 minutes to go and didn't have anything. Basically just said, do you all have any questions? And the chief judge says, well, your argument was that Mr. Harrell invited error because what happened was the judge, during that part of the sentencing, the judge didn't bring up forfeiture at all, and we're about to be done. Well, then the AUSA there, the prosecutor says, well, we haven't talked about forfeiture yet. So then the judge says, well, due to the late hour, we're going to address forfeiture later at a subsequent hearing. So my attorney says, okay, Your Honor. Well, they're trying to say he invited. The reason why they couldn't do that in person for me is because my lawyer invited the subsequent hearing, which should make it null and void that I wasn't present. But the chief judge says, well, it sounds like to me the judge invited the error. He's the one who said, due to the late hour, we're going to do this. And because he didn't say, Mr. Harrell, you are going to get forfeiture, but we're just going to talk about it later. He didn't say that. He just said, we're going to address it all later. So because he didn't say it's mandatory then, you can't go back. And so that was our argument is you can't just add, punishment, whenever you want to and invite it and say it's a clerical error, because that's what they said. It was a clerical error. But so we're still waiting on the opinion for that. But the chief judge looked at my attorney at the end of that, and he says, had you been Mr. Harrell's trial counsel, we very likely would not be here today. But he caught an unusual case. The other judge next to him said it was unique. In fact, we don't have anything to compare it to, right? And so that brings me to the point of, well, if you think about how many cases go through the Court of Appeals over history, if it's that unique and that unusual, then maybe because there shouldn't be a case. Because really, the whole problem with this case is they took an administrative process and turned it criminal because of who I was. You know what I mean? Like for veterans who seem like who may on the surface look like they're getting better, and of course that's all relative and subjective, the VA typically will send you a letter that says, hey, we're gonna propose to reduce your benefit level. And you can appeal this and we'll do another exam and then we'll make a determination. The worst thing that's ever supposed to happen is they reduce your percentage and you go on with life. But in my case, they decided to make it a criminal matter. And when I had an oral hearing with the judge, when they garnished my accounts and my wife's account, we have a joint account. They took her money, which is really what pissed me off. We had an oral hearing, and I went there by myself. And everybody's like, you can't go federal court by yourself. And I said, they literally took everything but $30 out of my account. What am I supposed to do? You know, any $30 lawyers, And so I go in there and he asked, he says, Mr. Earl, where's your counsel? I said, I am him. I'm doing this pro se. And he goes, I don't recommend that. I said, I have no choice. They took everything. Now, here's the thing. That prosecutor was from the financial litigation unit. He didn't know where the courtroom was. So I don't know that they go to court often, because by the time it gets to the financial piece, I think everybody's done, man. They're just like, whatever it is, just I'm done fighting this. Well, that ain't what I did. And so he had like it might have been a steno pad and maybe a manila folder. That was it. I had binders of case law and Congress and all these things. And so I opened up with that and said, I said, Your Honor, this is what they did. I went to a treatment program in Atlanta. The day that I got there, they knew that where I was going, because I have to report that. The day I showed up, they garnished my account, took like $30,000 from me. It was our last nest egg, really, because they had been draining us, right? and left $30, which is weird. Uh, I said, "But here's the problem. That is a joint account. That's my wife's money. I've been in prison. I haven't had any money. And the money that the VA is supposed to give me, they take that every month. I never see it. I never will see it unless I pay 200, right? So y'all took hers. Like, I have a problem with them taking her money." And the judge is like, "So you're not here for you?" I said, "No, not today. Not at this juncture. I didn't want to totally, you know." I said, "I'm my wife." I said, any man worth his salt would be in here, like, standing up for his wife." And he said, "That's commendable, Mr. Harrell." Right. And so he looks at the prosecutor and says, "What happened?" The prosecutor says, "Well, the United States has the right to take the money however they see fit, and that's what we did." And so then I pulled out this law that Congress wrote where it says disability is protected income. It can't be garnished, levied, or taken. And and the prosecutor says, "Well, unless it's the United States." And I said, "Your Honor, it doesn't say that in this law. It don't say unless you're the United States. It just says you can't. If that's the way it's going to be, then somebody should change it." But they haven't yet. And so that's why I'm going to show you this report where the court has split. And really, it's up to the court to decide how you want to honor this. And I said, what it seems like is if it's against like a corporation, the courts favor it. If it's against an individual, courts usually side with the government. And I brought all these, all these examples. And he just kind of smiling at me, And I said, "Furthermore, Your Honor, I have a problem with the judgment." I said, "They don't care what you wrote in the judgment." I did it on purpose, I was like, "They don't care what you wrote in the judgment. Like, you said that I wasn't to start paying restitution until March 1st of 2028, which was 4 years, by the way, which was unique, at an amount of $100 a month. They took everything. They didn't even pay attention to your date. They didn't even care about your amount." And so he's over there, "Your Honor, that's not true, but that's a floor, not a ceiling, And so the judge looked at me and he said, "Mr. Harrell, if in the event the government ever tries to take more than 25%, I'll give you another hearing." And then that's when he asked me, he says, "Do you think there's a miscommunication between the court, the VA, and the Department of Justice?" And I said, "Yes." I said, and that's when I told him about this is an administrative process. It's not designed to be criminals. Why nobody can figure it out. That's why the money that I've given the DOJ hasn't made it to the VA yet, and they're not even talking to each other. How do I know that any of the money I give is actually going to go to the place it's supposed to go? I don't have any receipts. Nobody sends me nothing, kind of thing. And he always just looks at the government to answer. "Oh, well, we'll make sure that, that kind of thing." But then he asked me, the last thing he asked me, and I was hoping he would, is he says, "Mr. Harrell, tell me about this treatment program that you're in." And I said, "Well, Your Honor, I was supposed to go to the Shepherd Center. It's a catastrophic brain injury hospital, spinal, brain, best in the world. And they have a military section. And they send guys from CIA, FBI, anybody with brain injuries. It's like the top notch." I said I was supposed to be down there for 2 weeks. But actually, the doctor that I have that's reviewing my cases happens to be the chief medical officer of that hospital. He is a veteran, was a Navy surgeon, so every now and then he takes on veterans for clients. And I said that he said after testing that I needed to be there 14 weeks due to the severity of the disabilities that were in question during trial. And dude, you could have heard a pin drop in there. I said the very same disabilities that I went through trial for are so, in his words, they're so severe that not only do I have to stay longer than the 2 weeks, but it's a 12-week program. They want me to stay 14 weeks. And he just said, "There's some things I have to look at," basically. But I was glad that was the last thing that was said in that room because I don't want this to happen twice, but then, I want them to understand that those who were, prosecuting me weren't doctors. They saw me on TV. They saw me speaking. They saw, me changing policy which they didn't like. They saw me stealing campaign points because we were completing the work. We wasn't just saying, hey, in 5 years we want to do that. We were doing it in 5 months, and I was doing it for $5,000, not $2 million, right? So people hated that, and so really that's what all this case is about. It's about, and that's why I've been working with these weaponization groups, because it was at the very end of the last administration's Department of Justice. In fact, I talk to a lot of people now, obviously, who are been in the similar situations as me as far as in the justice system federally, and to have an indictment and then a trial and then sentencing in a year is rather unique. But they got it in at the end of December of 2024 for a reason. You know what I mean? And so my hope now is that the current administration will be able to see through it and be able to potentially help me.
What do you think the silver lining is here for you? What do you think was the lesson, the takeaway?
Well, one of the takeaways is I tell my kids this, is whether you do good or whether you do bad, people will hate you. They will hate you for being too good, and they will hate you for being too bad, but to do good anyway. And then from a spiritual standpoint, I told them early on, because I'm their hero, right? And those are heavy shoes to fill, man. And they just kept saying, they saw Dad he couldn't do anything about this, like he couldn't fix it, right? And I said, I want you to know that when you have these problems, you got to first go to God. I'm not him. You know what I mean? Like, I'm in a position now where all I can do is totally rely on him. I can do nothing for myself. Of course, I can advocate. I can post. I can talk to people who have connection, who have access and things. But at the end of the day, there's one man in this country who has to decide whether or not he believes that. And I said it doesn't matter whether it's not about who deserves it all the time. It's about there's a lot of things that go into deciding who gets clemency, right? And I said I may not, and we have to accept that. And if I don't, we'll continue on anyway. If I do, I'll just be able to move a little faster because I won't have the black cloud hanging over my head, right? I said, but at the end of the day, I'm going to do what I need to do either way. And so don't let this stop you from doing what's right in this world, because oftentimes what's right doesn't line up to what the world views, right? And so in a spiritual sense, God's commands doesn't always interact with what the Department of Justice believes. In fact, they hardly do, right? And even in my allocution, I told the judge, I said, Your Honor, no matter what happens here today, I will never stop doing what I feel is right for people who are suffering. Like, we saved people's lives. I will never apologize for that. Of course, that fired him up, because I would never, what they want you to do, accept guilt, right? I've never done that. Now, my lawyer tried to say something in his little, statement of, and I didn't like it, and I told him that, but he tried to say, Jeremy did the right thing or the wrong thing for the right reasons. I didn't do anything wrong. You all told me that I was permanently and totally disabled. I don't know what people hear, like what they think when they hear those two words, but to me it means all-encompassing, like permanent, total. Static disability, no likelihood of improvement. So why did that change 14 years later, 15 years later? You never bothered me. But as our organization grew, and as I got invited into these rooms with legislators, both local and national, and I started making a difference, and I started telling the truth, all of a sudden did it become a problem. When I was a little social group, we were a little social group, and I was just a one-man show, just going out and feeding the homeless. Everybody was cheering. Yes, right? But then when it started to make a difference nationally, then all of a sudden somebody didn't like that, right? And so I know that this happens sometimes, and what I've always told veterans is I will advocate for you even when it's uncomfortable. And so people ask me all the time, they're like, Jeremy, why do you keep fighting? Because in fact, 2 days before supervised release, I put my 2255 motion in, right? They've already answered and said, well, what's the point now? What's the continuing consequences? Which I had to address that before the 30th of this month, and I already have what I want to say. But the point is, I fought every step of the way, everything that you could do in the federal system I've done. And a lot of the reason I did that was, number one, I want to know how to fight, right? But number two is, if they do something like this to veterans again. I want to be able to look them in the eye and say, hey, I did everything I could to try to not make this permanent. I tried to beat it every way I could, right? And because that's my promise to them. Because if they do it to me, they're going to do it to others. And this agent who used to be a Secret Service agent who was overzealous, somehow you don't go from Secret Service, which is the cream of the crop, to VAOIG for no reason. So he needed a feather, right? He needed a headline. And I think that's what happened. The initial tip that they got, the anonymous tip that come 2 months after they started investigating me, and the prosecutor said in trial, he don't know where the tip comes from. I don't know how you are legally able to do that. Like you got to know. He says he don't know where anyway, it talked about they thought maybe I was taking money from the organization because, and it says I was living too good. I don't know what that means. I mean, I have one house and one truck and one car, right? Well, they did a forensic audit. They found nothing. In fact, I've taken less than most nonprofit leaders in this country. Why didn't they stop? Why did they close the case? Well, because they had to find something. So then they go down the rabbit hole and they try to find a way. And because the government paid me, they get access to you. And then they figured out a way to do it. And so anything I can do in the future to fight, I'm going to keep fighting it. They don't like that about me. I'm sure there's probably a picture of me with darts in it. In fact, when we were going back and forth with the garnishment, right, when they took the money, the judge made that prosecutor communicate with me over a period of time to come to a resolution, which I thought was unique for a judge to do. I feel like the judge at times, showed favor, right, but at times didn't, right, like you said. Well, so we go back and forth about money. I want, I said, you can keep $4,000 and give me the rest. Well, they're like, no, they got to win. So eventually, after back and forth, and I even tried, I said, we can meet in person. Like, I'll come to your office where we can just talk about this. Of course, he never took me up on that offer for me to come in person. But as we were at the final communication, he said, I'll give you $8,000 back and require no documentation. Now, understand I've had to take all these bank statements, right? And so I'm a layman. I don't understand none of this. So I respond, just to be clear, because I'm not a professional attorney like you. So now documentation isn't important, ? Right? And he says something about his discretion, right? He says, but you don't have to, if you take this, you don't have to submit any documentation. I said, well, okay, I'll take that, but then I also need you to remove the garnishment off my account, because if they wouldn't have done that, any money that I made up to $200,000, they just take it. I couldn't survive. There's no way, right? They're not giving me the VA money. And he said, okay. So he writes this proposed order and it says account. And I said, look, again, I'm just a layman. It needs to be more clear. It should say accounts, so that any accounts I have there, and so a couple of days went past, and then he comes back and says, okay. Right. So then people are like, Jeremy, like, you got a lot more of the money. I'm like, listen, but this ain't about the money as much as like the government said I stole from them, but they just gave me money back. They say that I can't be trusted because I was a liar, but they trust me enough to remove a garnishment. That's all I need to know, right? Like, if somebody steals from you, right, you're not going to give them money back, and so that's what happened. And so that's where we're at now, man. I'm still very much in the fight, but I'm going to go as far as I can go with it. And hopefully we get a good report with this forfeiture. And then ultimately hoping one day I can get the president's autograph. I'm not a big autograph guy, man. Like, I'm not a fan. Like, I've never been like, hey, I want their autograph, but man, I need this one. You know what I mean? And so yeah, that's kind of where we're at. But,
well, Jeremy, I appreciate you taking the
sir.
time and sharing your story with us. And, I really hope you get that pardon.
Yeah, me too, man. And again, I tell everybody, I was just up in D.C. We had this event, right? And I want to be clear that I don't want it just to ride off into the sunset. I want this so I can go back to doing what God has called me to do and to help so many people. Because this has impacted our community. Like, I got Vietnam veterans calling me all the time, like, "Hey, Jeremy, I can't work, but I do raffles at the Marine Corps League. Are they going to take, my benefits?" I mean, it's a bad precedent to set. Like when you're telling veterans to go out and be part of the community and not isolate, because isolation leads to oftentimes suicide in our community. Well, but if they're going to be criminalized for doing something, then what are they going to do? They're not going to do it, and then it leads to worse things. And so, I hope the government can make it right. I hope they can fix this wrong, and not just for me, but for the veteran community, so these veterans can get out and start helping each other again. Because we can't complain about the 23 veterans a day that kill themselves if you're handcuffing everybody who's trying to do something about it. And so ultimately, I hope that's the message that gets sent, is that we should be celebrating veterans who want to get out and help other veterans, and instead of making it a criminal process. But yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, man.